Hey guys, tonight we're doing something a little different. We're slipping quietly past the abbey gates, past the candlelit hallways and the stone fountains, and into a world where vows of chastity and obedience were often more guidelines than guarantees. This isn't the Sunday school version of convent life. No, tonight you're going to learn what really happened behind the cloister walls, secrets buried in archives, whispered across centuries and scribbled in margins by nuns who lived lives far more complex than they let on. Just a heads up, you probably won't survive this, spiritually, emotionally, or reputationally, so before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your city and the time down in the comments. I love seeing where and when you're all tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing outside a medieval convent in the early 14th century. It's cold, probably damp, and there's a soft mist creeping over the grass like it's trying not to be noticed. The building itself is massive but silent. Grey stone, narrow windows, heavy doors. It looks like a prison, and for many of the women inside it might as well be. But unlike a prison, there's no crime, at least not officially. As the heavy wooden door creaks open, you step into the cloister. It smells like wax and stone and something faintly medicinal, lavender and vinegar. A young novice passes by, eyes lowered, hands folded, wrapped in layers of wool and linen. You watch her disappear down a corridor, and as her footsteps fade, you feel the stillness settle in again. But underneath it, you sense something else. A tension, like something's being held back. The abbey itself is divided into areas you're not supposed to know about. The public side, the chapel, the visitors' hall, the front gardens, is what outsiders see. Holy women praying, singing, working the land in silence. But behind the veil there are kitchens, sleeping quarters, an infirmary, storerooms, and tucked away in corners, private cells where nuns live, think, dream, and sometimes break every rule they swore to uphold. You notice how quiet it is. Not peaceful, tense. Everything is ordered. The rules are etched into daily life. Wake at dawn, prayer, work, more prayer, study, silence, bed. Obedience is absolute. Chastity is assumed, but that assumption doesn't hold up well under pressure. And in here, pressure is a given. Women didn't always choose this life. Some were sent here as children, barely 10 years old, promised to God by parents looking to secure noble bloodlines without paying out massive dowries. Others were widows, locked away for convenience. Some came willingly, searching for spiritual purpose or running from scandal. But no matter how they arrived, once inside, everyone had to play by the same rules, or pretend to. The tension comes from that pretending. The suppression. You feel it already. It's in the way one sister glances too long at another. In the way two novices stand just a little too close in the cloister garden. In the cryptic marks etched into the back wall of the library, where someone's clearly been keeping a tally of something. And then there's the silence. Absolute silence in certain hours, called the Great Silence, from sunset to morning prayer. But people still move in those hours. You'll see. At dinner, the sisters eat in silence while one reads from the Rule of St. Benedict. The room smells of broth, stale bread, and the faint wax of tallow candles. No one looks up, but you sense the thoughts beneath their bowed heads. Some are focused on prayer. Others are thinking about the outside world, family, lovers, revenge. One is probably wondering how to sneak a letter back to a man she hasn't seen in years. Another is trying to forget the baby she gave up last winter. You look across the table and realise someone's missing. She's not sick. She's not in prayer. She's just not there. And no one says a word about it. Here's a hard historical fact to chew on. In 14th century England alone, over 150 convents existed, housing thousands of women. Some of them, like the Benedictines, had fairly strict routines. Others, especially the wealthier ones, had more flexible interpretations of the rule. The abbess had a lot of power. She could interpret discipline, approve visitors, even manage finances. So if you were tight with the abbess, you had options, which brings us to one of the quieter controversies, the privilege economy inside the convent. Not everyone was equal. Noble nuns with fancy dowries got private rooms, better food, and sometimes even their own servants. Lower status sisters might sleep 3 to a bed in drafty dormitories. Some scholars argue this class divide created resentments that led to hidden sabotage, secret alliances, and even blackmail. Others think that's overblown, just modern drama projected backward. Still, you can't help but feel it. Even in God's house, politics thrive. Quirky fact? Okay, get this. In some nunneries, cats were considered semi-sacred and allowed to roam freely. Not just for catching mice, but because some believe they absorbed sin through touch. So yes, Sister Marjorie's tabby might have been her spiritual sidekick, or her confession booth. And here's where it gets murky. Scholars still argue over how pure these places really were. Some insist most nuns followed the rules, loved God, lived with humility. Others point to centuries of buried scandals, hidden pregnancies, stolen relics, lesbian love letters, and even murder as proof that repression breeds rebellion. The truth, like most things, is probably somewhere in the messy middle. But you're not here for the middle. Tonight, you're going deeper. The whispers are real. The secrets were scribbled in marginalia, hidden behind false walls and, in some cases, shouted in public trial before being sealed away in dusty ledgers no one thought you'd read. The abbey is sleeping now. The candles are out. The wind is pushing through the cracks in the stone, and you hear it. The faint sound of soft footsteps in the hall. Someone is moving when she shouldn't be, and you follow. You keep to the shadows, bare feet padding across cold stone. Whoever you're following doesn't know they're being followed, or maybe they do and they just don't care. Their silhouette flickers in the hallway, pale robes brushing against the wall, long habit trailing just slightly above the ground. You stay a few steps back, holding your breath, heart slow but steady. She turns a corner. You wait, count to 10, then slip after her. She's headed toward the eastern cloister, quiet during the day, completely off limits at night. The rules are clear. No one walks unaccompanied after compline. The final prayer. If the abbess finds out, there'll be penance. If the bishop does, something worse. But your curiosity's stronger than your fear, so you press on. You duck behind a crumbling column just as she stops at a door tucked behind a faded tapestry. It's nothing special, just old wood, iron hinges, but there's something in the way she hesitates. A long pause, a sigh. Then she opens it and disappears inside. You wait. Then slowly, silently, you slip in after her. The room is small, maybe once a storeroom, but now it's something else entirely. A low-burning candle illuminates a tight space filled with scrolls, books, and tiny bundles of dried herbs tied with thread. A secret study, a hidden sanctuary. And sitting in the middle of it all is Sister Agnes. She's not the youngest, not the prettiest, but something about her has always drawn eyes. A sharpness in her gaze, a steadiness. She's not surprised to see you, doesn't flinch, just tilts her head and says, "Couldn't sleep either." You sit. The candle crackles, and just like that, the silence becomes something else, an understanding. Over the next hour, you learn more than you probably should. Agnes wasn't born for the veil. She was the third daughter of a minor noble, destined for marriage until a scandal struck her family, something involving her older brother and a duel that didn't end well. With no prospects left, she was given to the convent along with a fat dowry to ease the sting. She tells you this with a dry laugh, running her fingers over a Latin manuscript that's definitely not on the approved reading list. It's a medical text, smuggled from a university scribe, full of illustrations, some anatomical, some deeply questionable. Why do women become nuns? It's not for one reason. Some, like Agnes, are forced into it as a solution to political or economic inconvenience. For others, the convent is a refuge. A few are devout, drawn to the spiritual life. But then there are those who arrive because the world outside has become too dangerous. Victims of assault, survivors of war, women whose families would rather hide them than protect them. Here, they're given a new name, a new uniform, and a very old set of rules. And no one ever asks what they were running from. You walk back to your cell a little later, brain buzzing. It's strange how different everything feels now. The halls look the same, but they hum with new energy. These women aren't just quiet, pious figures on a postcard, they're layered. Some are angry, and some are in love. Some are hiding things that would make even the abbess blush. Historical reality check. In the 13th and 14th centuries, convents were often used as elegant solutions to complex social problems. A nobleman with too many daughters? Ship one off to God. A woman caught in an affair? Veil her. A widow too powerful with too much land? Into the cloister she goes. Becoming a nun didn't always mean devotion. Sometimes it meant exile in disguise. There's a strange little fringe theory you've probably never heard. Some researchers believe that a few of these convents, especially the wealthier ones, operated more like gated communities than spiritual retreats. Imagine country clubs for medieval women of a certain class where the habits were symbolic, the vows flexible, and the rules negotiable if you had the right connections. The evidence? Lavish personal items found in nun graves, silver combs, silk undergarments, even love tokens. Still there's debate. Some scholars argue this is exaggerated, misread through a modern lens. Others insist we've sanitized convent life so thoroughly that we've forgotten its human side. The truth, as always, is annoyingly complicated. You're starting to see it now. The next day, as the nuns kneel in the chapel, their voices blend into a chant that fills the air like warm fog. You watch their faces, some are blank, others serene, but a few look elsewhere. Sister Joan, eyes clear, mouth moving, fingers clenched too tightly around her rosary. Sister Eleanor, eyes wide open, staring at a stained glass image of Mary with something too raw to be simple admiration. You don't need to be told that something's stirring in this place. After prayers, you're assigned to work in the library, dusting shelves, reshelving volumes, cataloguing old parchment. It's dull, repetitive, and exactly the kind of task where secrets like to hide. In the back, you find a loose board under a cabinet. Inside, a bundle of parchment wrapped in cloth, faintly perfumed. Letters. You pull one out and read. It's not addressed to a man, it's to another sister, and it's intense. The language is veiled, cloaked in scriptural metaphors, but the meaning is clear. Affection, desire, a promise to meet in the garden after nightfall. You put the letters back, carefully. This isn't just about vows broken in secret, it's about identity, about power, about how women carved space for themselves inside walls built to confine them. In here, rules bend, realities blur, and you're only 2 days in. That night, Agnes finds you again. This time she doesn't say anything, just hands you a folded scrap of parchment and walks away. You open it. It's a map of the convent, but not the one you were shown. This one has markings, secret places, hidden rooms, paths not meant to be walked. Looks like you've been recruited. You wait until well after Compline, long after the last bell has rung and the nuns have scattered to their beds like leaves settling at the end of a windstorm. The halls creak with the usual groans of old wood and older stone, but the shadows are still. No footsteps, no voices, just the slow hush of breath beneath the world. You'd slip the parchment map from under your blanket, lit faintly by a stub of candle you weren't supposed to keep. The ink is shaky but deliberate, and the markings lead down to a section of the convent you didn't even know had a lower level. The stone steps are narrow and spiraled, crumbling at the edges, slick with time. You descend carefully, one hand on the wall, your breath puffing out in small white clouds. It's colder here, the air thick with old moisture, and the faint scent of decay. Finally, you reach the bottom, a forgotten passageway, lined with what used to be storage rooms, or cells, maybe, you're not sure. But one door is ajar and inside you find her. Sister Teresa. She's older, her habit worn thin, her face lined with the kind of knowledge that doesn't come from books. You thought she was mute. She never speaks in chapel, never sings during services, but now she's sitting before a low-burning fire, stitching something into a long strip of linen, and when she sees you, she simply says, "Took you long enough." You sit beside her, no questions, not yet. She tells you in a voice like rustling leaves about the dowry trap, how for centuries noble families used nunneries as dumping grounds for inconvenient daughters. It wasn't about for faith, it was about finances. A dowry to a convent was often cheaper than marrying a daughter off, especially if there were sons to protect, and once the girl was veiled, she was effectively erased. No more legal rights, no inheritance, just another name on a monastery ledger. You think of Agnes, and suddenly the sharpness in her eyes makes more sense. But Teresa's story doesn't stop there. She tells you about the game behind the veil, how some noble daughters arrived with servants and personal prayer books bound in velvet, while peasant girls scrubbed floors in sins. God doesn't play favourites, Teresa says, but abbesses do, and sometimes those abbesses wield more power than a bishop ever will. You lean back, eyes drawn to a carved symbol above the hearth. A serpent wrapped around a flowering tree. It's not Christian, not even close. Teresa sees you looking. Older than Rome, she murmurs, and says no more. Quirky fact, you've got one. Some convents required a woman's family to pay an additional dowry if the nun died early. Why? Because her soul was considered unfinished business, and extra prayers were needed to push her through purgatory. Imagine that still cashing in after death. Back in the present, you follow Teresa's directions to a corridor no one mentions. Behind a mouldy tapestry of St. Catherine lies a hollowed-out wall just big enough to crawl through. It leads to a collapsed stairwell, which in turn opens into what looks like an abandoned scriptorium. Ink bottles shattered, pens dried to twigs, but scrawled across the walls in faded brown script are names. Dozens of them. Some you recognise, some you don't. And in the centre of it all, carved deeper than the rest, we remember. Teresa never says what it means, she just presses something into your hand before disappearing back into the shadows, a pendant made of smoothed bone, etched with the same serpent sigil. The next morning, chapel feels different. The prayers sound hollow. The incense smells stronger, like it's trying to cover something up. You notice Sister Anne blinking too fast, hands trembling. A novice, barely 15. You wonder what brought her here, what she's hiding, what she's afraid of. Later, you're sent to assist in the infirmary. It's a chilly room with cracked glass windows and rust-stained basins. Sister Claire oversees the sick with a grim efficiency, and you get the feeling she'd rather be anywhere else. You're tasked with grinding dried herbs for poultices, sage, marigold, valerian. But nestled among them, you find something off, belladonna, poison. Claire notices your hesitation and snatches the jar from your hand. "Some herbs are only for the abbess," she says sharply. "Not your concern." Her eyes linger a second too long before she turns away. There's a reason so many convents were suspected of sorcery. Women trained in healing, midwifery, medicine, botany became easy targets for suspicion. Some really did know how to help, some probably knew how to harm, and in a world where male doctors feared educated women, it was safer to call them witches than acknowledge their skin. Later that night, Agnes corners you in the cloister. She pulls you behind a pillar and shoves a folded letter into your palm. "Don't read it here," she hisses, "and whatever you do, don't let the abbess see it." You wait until midnight. Then, tucked under your blanket, you unfold it. It's a love letter. Raw, emotional, desperate. But it isn't written by Agnes. It's addressed to her, from someone called M. You read it twice, then a third time. It speaks of nights in the crypt, of hands brushing under robes, of promises to run away together. It ends with the line, "I would take the veil again, just to be near you." And then you remember something Sister Teresa said, her voice half lost in the fire's hiss. "Some sisters don't run from men, they run to each other." You lie awake until morning staring at the ceiling. Here's the open debate historians still wrangle over. How widespread was romantic or sexual intimacy among medieval nuns? Some point to isolated scandals, rare exceptions. Others suggest it was far more common, just rarely documented, or deliberately erased. Love doesn't always follow the rules, and when the world offers no space for certain desires, even God's house might become a hiding place. The abbess calls an assembly at dawn. Someone has gone missing. Sister Anne. No one speaks, no one even breathes. But across the room you lock eyes with Agnes. She looks like she already knows, and now, so do you. The morning air is wet and sharp, thick with that early autumn chill that settles in your bones before you even realise you're cold. The nuns gather silently in the chapel, their breath fogging slightly in the pale light slanting through the stained glass windows. The abbess stands at the front like a statue carved from ironwood. Her voice cuts the air, not loud, not frantic, but final. Sister Anne has left the convent. She doesn't elaborate. No mention of where, or how, or why. No questions allowed. No emotion shown, just a declaration. Left. But you can feel the fear ripple through the room like a chill down the spine. Because no one just leaves. That's not how any of this works. There's a gate locked from the outside. There are guards in the town. There are vows. And the worst part? You know she didn't leave alone. No one like Anne. Anne could have done that without help. Back in the dormitory, the tension is so thick it's practically breathable. Agnes finds you near the washing basins and doesn't say anything at first. Then she quietly slips you a fragment of cloth, rough linen, faint traces of dried blood, and something else, A tiny patch of embroidery, a dove stitched in blue thread. "She was carrying it the night before," she whispers. "She was scared." You think about the last time you saw Anne, how she looked like she might shatter from the inside, and now she's just gone. You spend the afternoon in the convent scriptorium supposedly copying a section from the Book of Hours, but your eyes keep drifting to the margins of the manuscript. Faint notes, doodles, names that don't match the official roster of sisters. Someone, maybe several someones, have been leaving messages in the white space, codes, warnings. One symbol keeps showing up, a small looping figure 8, always at the corners, always just barely noticeable. Agnes later tells you it's called the Endless Knot, a symbol used by some as a secret sign of unity, resistance, love. For us, she says, it means someone's still watching. And then she tells you about the letters. Love letters aren't new here. They're just rarely found before they're burned. Some are smuggled in from the outside, traders, stable boys, even travelling priests. Others are written between the sisters themselves. Some are innocent, others not so much. And a few have nearly brought the whole house down. One, Agnes tells you, was written by a nun to a monk at a neighbouring abbey. It contained detailed descriptions, very detailed, of imagined encounters that were, let's say, unlikely to appear in any liturgical text. The letter was intercepted, read aloud during a disciplinary hearing, and then archived. You're tempted to ask where it is. Agnes just smirks and says, "I'll show you when you're ready." Here's your historical fact of the night. In the 14th century, a nun named Sister Benedetta Carlini rose to power in an Italian convent by claiming to have visions and divine conversations. Turns out, she was also involved in a years-long relationship with another nun. When authorities finally investigated, her visions were declared false and she was locked away in solitary confinement for the rest of her life. But the record survived. Her words, her actions, and the church's outrage are all still there. In ink. Proof that not everything was as holy as it appeared. You wander the cloister garden after sunset. The stones are slick with dew, and the moon hangs low and heavy, casting everything in silver. You run your hand along the hedgerow, thinking about the dove on Anne's cloth, thinking about escape. The idea of leaving seems absurd. The convent isn't just walls and prayers, it's your whole world. There's nowhere to go, and yet they try. History's littered with runaways. Nuns who scaled walls, disguised themselves as boys, or faked illness to get carried out. Some made it, some were dragged back, some were never seen again. The open debate here is about agency. Were nuns victims of confinement, or did they carve power within those walls? Some historians argue that convents were the only place women could gain real authority, running finances, lands, and legal affairs. Others insist that the constraints were just as harsh, just hidden behind ritual and lace. You find a note wedged in the garden wall. It's written in a rushed, shaky hand. They know. I think the abbess suspects everything. I'll try tonight. If I don't return, burn this, no name, but you know who wrote it. Agnes finds you again that night. There's no candle, no whispering, just a look. She leads you to the far end of the library, where a panel of shelving swings open to reveal a staircase you never knew existed. It leads to a small room, bare stone, low ceiling, nothing but a pile of rotted cushions and a stack of old books. Among them is the letter, not a copy, not notes, the real thing. You read it slowly, the ink is faded, but still legible. It describes dreams, touch, a shared bed. "I feel no sin in your arms," it says, "only God's warmth made real." It's both beautiful and terrifying, because someone risked everything to write it, and someone else risked even more to keep it hidden. Agnes watches you as you read, but she doesn't speak, not until you set the letter down. Then she says, "There's more of us, quiet ones, hidden ones, and we remember every sister who vanished, every one they tried to erase." You nod, because now you remember too. It begins with a whisper, always does. At first, it's just a passing murmur in the refectory, a half-heard comment between mouthfuls of watered-down stew. Something about the garden, about late-night visits, then it becomes a glance exchanged during matins, a tilt of the head, a hand lingering too long over a shared book. By the time you notice the shift, it's already in motion. The secret isn't the whisper anymore, it's the silence that follows it. You're in the cloister garden again, mid-afternoon, just after chores. The sun hangs low and lazy, casting pale light across the stone path. Vines crawl along the walls like they're trying to find a way out just like everyone else. You're trimming lavender when you notice two sisters sitting beneath the archway, Sister Beatrix and Sister Ellen. They have always been friendly, nothing odd about that, but today they're too close, not touching, not quite, but the gap between them is smaller than custom allows, and there's something in Ellen's laugh that makes the hairs on your neck rise. You've heard that laugh before. It's the sound of someone teetering between innocence and sin, and one who knows exactly how far she's gone and how much further she might go. Later that night you pass Ellen on the way to the dormitory. She doesn't meet your eyes, just brushes past, and you catch it. A smear of dirt on her sleeve, a fleck of grass near the hem of her habit. From the garden? But prayers ended hours ago. You lie in bed listening to the sounds of sleep, soft breathing, the occasional cough, a muttered dream. But beneath it all there's something else. A creak, a soft thud, a door opening somewhere down the hall. You slip out of bed. Barefoot, careful, you follow the sound down the hall. Past the statue of St. Scholastica, past the door to the infirmary, into the garden again. The moon is out, huge, yellow, hanging low over the convent like a watchful eye. You round the corner of the hedgerow, and there they are, Ellen and Beatrix, pressed close, mouths barely an inch apart, faces glowing silver in the moonlight. Ellen is whispering something, one hand gently holding the other's wrist. Beatrix is crying, not sobbing, but that quiet kind of crying that doesn't want to be heard. You freeze. Then Ellen says, "We can't keep doing this." Beatrix leans in, whispering something back. You can't hear the words. But whatever she says, Ellen doesn't argue. They fall into each other like gravity has given up, and just like that, you're watching two women in God's garden break every rule they swore to obey. You back away. Not because you're ashamed, but because you understand now. This place holds too many secrets for one pair of hands. Here's your historical fact. In 13th century France, a group of nuns was investigated for immoral acts with each other. The accusations were vague, improper touching, emotional dependency, disobedience, but the language used in the surviving church records suggests something deeper. Passion, romance, maybe even love. The punishments ranged from public confession to being transferred to isolated convents. The goal wasn't just discipline, it was separation. The next morning Ellen is one. Not missing, not vanished like Anne. Just reassigned. That's what the abbess says. Transferred to another house, a smaller one across the river. No explanation, no farewell. Beatrix sits in chapel like a shadow, hollow-eyed, lips unmoving during the hymns. You approach her after the service. She looks at you for a long moment, then says, "She didn't go willingly," and walks away. That afternoon, you help clean the apothecary. You're sorting through vials and mortar stones when you find it. A scrap of fabric tucked behind a jar of valerian root. It's part of a novice's veil, stained red at the edge. You show it to Agnes later. She closes her eyes. That's not Ellen's blood. You don't ask whose it is. Quirky detail time. Some convents had secret gardens not listed on any map. Literal hidden space ends, walled off within the walls. They were meant for meditation, solitude. But in many cases, they became sanctuaries for the forbidden meetings, romantic, conspiratorial, or sometimes just a place to scream where no one could hear you. You find one 2 days later, a hidden courtyard behind the scriptorium, accessible only through a loose stone in the cloister's east wall. Inside, a broken bench, a statue of Mary with her face worn smooth by weather, and initials carved into the wall, dozens, pairs. A few with hearts, some with dates. One set reads A plus M, 332. You trace it with your fingers, Agnes and M, the one from the letter. You turn to find her standing behind you. "I thought you might find it," she says. "This was ours." You sit in the grass together. She doesn't cry, but you can tell she wants to. She tells you about M, short for Mariotta, a novice who never took her final vows. Smart, rebellious, always laughing. They met in the scriptorium over a disputed psalm translation. Fell in love over candlelight and stolen moments. Agnes wanted to keep her secret. Mariotta wanted to run. She tried to leave, Agnes says. I helped her. We got as far as the city gate. You don't need her to finish. She didn't make it, did she? Agnes shakes her head. They said she was possessed. Called in a priest, an exorcist. You sit in silence for a long time. This is where the scholarly debate gets uncomfortable. Some historians chalk these stories up to spiritual hysteria, women misinterpreting emotional bonds in an environment of intense repression. Others argue they were real relationships, real love, buried by centuries of shame and doctrine. The records are incomplete. Most were altered, redacted, or destroyed entirely. But this courtyard, this wall, these carvings, they tell the truth in a language no parchment ever could. You help Agnes up. Together you light a small candle at the foot of the weathered statue. You don't pray, you just stand and remember. Back in your cell that night you find another scrap of parchment. This one isn't from Agnes. It's older. Hidden in the spine of a prayer book you were assigned earlier that week. The ink is faded, the Latin shaky. I love her in silence. I bury her in prayer. It's unsigned, but it's not forgotten. You know something's wrong the second you walk into the refectory. Not wrong like someone's sick or the bread is burned, or Sister Claire has snapped again and started slamming her rosary against the table. No, this is deeper, quieter. Everyone is acting too normal, too polite. Sisters who never speak are smiling and making small talk. The abbess is unusually cheerful. It's the kind of forced peace that only shows up after something awful has happened, and no one's ready to admit it. You find your seat. The soup is the same tasteless barley blend it always is. The bread is dry. And yet no one complains. You look down the table and notice Beatrix is missing. Just gone. No announcement, no transfer, no explanation. You don't ask. You already know what that silence means. That night you find Agnes in the old scriptorium, the hidden one, the one with the hollow wall and the endless knot symbols, scratched deep into the stone. She's sitting cross-legged on the floor, a tiny lamp flickering beside her, illuminating another bundle of letters. Some are sealed with wax, others are loose and torn, covered in blotched ink and fingerprints. She doesn't look up. She was taken in the middle of the night, she says, dragged to the bishop's house in the next town. You sit beside her, watching the flame twist and dance like it's trying to flee the oil. What will they do to her, you ask, though you're not sure you want the answer. Agnes doesn't sugarcoat it. Question her, make her confess, maybe penance, maybe worse. You say nothing. You think of Beatrix's hollow face, Ellen's reassignment, Anne's disappearance, Mariotta's death, and now Beatrix too. Agnes hands you a letter. They've been collecting them, she says, using them as proof. Someone's been giving them up. You blink. Someone inside Pez. She nods. One of us. It hits you like a slap. You've been so caught up in the beauty and the danger of the hidden relationships, the secrets whispered to in the garden. The letters passed in shadows that you forgot what happens when the wrong person hears the right thing. Someone is betraying the others. Someone is playing both sides. Here's a historical fact for you. In the late 15th century, a convent in Würzburg, Germany, was rocked by a scandal involving over a dozen nuns accused of breaking their vows. The investigation was sparked by an anonymous letter sent to the bishop written by a nun. She named names, described details, and in doing so secured her place while condemning the rest. History doesn't remember her name, but it remembers the aftermath. Back in the present, Agnes opens one of the letters. It's newer. The ink still smells fresh. They meet in the old library, the one behind the scriptorium. Sister Agnes leads them. I have seen her with at least 3 others. If you want to know more, watch her during Lauds. You read it twice. Handwriting, you ask. Agnes shakes her head. Disguised. But someone knows too much. You're about to ask what happens next, but she's already packing the letters away. We move, she says. The hiding places aren't safe anymore. That night you help relocate the archives. The letters, the sigils, the artifacts. Even the carved pieces of the stone wall with initials, scraped clean and hidden in cloth bags. You're sweating by the time it's done, heart racing. You never imagined your time in a convent would involve late-night smuggling missions under the nose of an abbess. You pause in the hallway afterward, pressing your back against the wall, listening for footsteps. None, just the sound of wind through the windows and your own breath in your ears. Quirky detail. Some convents had actual escape routes built into their architecture. Not for scandal, but for emergencies. Viking raids, fires, disease. But over time, those routes took on other uses. Secret lovers, black market goods, even fugitives hiding from the church itself. Agnes has one more secret to show you. She leads you to a chamber near the chapel, one you've never seen unlocked. but tonight the key is in her hand. Inside, a stone basin, rusted chains, a crumbling fresco of St. Agatha, and carved into the wall over and over again, confess. This, Agnes says, was where they brought nuns for penance. You stare at the chains. They're small, wrist-sized, fixed to the wall like someone was expected to kneel and stay there. What did they do to them? Agnes exhales. Prayer, starvation, isolation, sometimes worse. Here's where the scholarly debate sharpens its teeth. Some say convent penance was mostly symbolic, days of silence, extra chores. But others point to darker evidence, reports of nuns bound in cells, denied food, forced to recite prayers until collapse. Some even suggest exorcisms were used as punishment, not purification. You walk back to your cell in silence. The wind has picked up. It howls softly through the stone halls, curling around doorways and echoing faintly like distant voices. You think of the girl who screamed during an exorcism. The one Agnes said was Mariotta. You think of the unnamed letters, the chained penance room, the whispering walls, and then you find it. Slipped under your door, folded neatly. I know what you're doing. Stop, or you'll end up like her. No name, just the endless knot, drawn backwards. A mockery. You crush the paper in your hand, someone is watching, and they want you to stop remembering. You wake up before the bells, long before the first bleary-eyed sister rises to mumble her way through Lord's. You lie there, eyes open, hands tucked against your chest. The crumpled warning still hidden under your mattress like a curse you can't throw away. You don't move, don't breathe too loudly. Somewhere in this building, someone is watching. Not the abbess, not a bishop, someone closer, closer than you'd like. When the bell finally tolls, it rattles straight through your bones. You rise, dress, and blend in. That's key now. No lingering glances, no hesitating in the corridor, just another obedient little nun in a long line of identical shadows. During morning prayers, Agnes won't look at you. Her head is bowed, fingers working her rosary like a seamstress sewing secrets. That's how she tells you to wait, so you do. After prayers, the abbess stands and clears her throat. We will begin a period of silent reflection. No speech outside of prayers. No letters will be sent or received. All correspondence is to be turned over to the priory office. The room stays still, but it shifts. Every heart skips. Every breath is drawn in just a little too fast. They know. Not everything, not yet. But enough to panic. You spend the morning in the kitchen, scrubbing stone floors with a group of novices too tired to ask questions. The soap burns your fingers, but the pain is a comfort now. Something real, something simple. Your mind churns. Who sent the letter? How close are they? Is it one of the girls who always seems too quiet? The one who kneels too long? The one who volunteers for everything? At lunch, Sister Agatha Sears sits beside you. You don't know her well, middle-aged, polite, has a habit of quoting saints nobody asked for. She leans over her soup and says quietly, "Confession tonight will be mandatory. Prepare your soul." You nod. Keep chewing. Inside, your stomach turns cold. That evening, you slip into the chapel early. The incense is already lit, thick and perfumed, curling in the air like a snake. The crucifix looms above the altar, and you stare up at it, wondering how many women have stood here begging for forgiveness they didn't owe. Agnes joins you at the kneeler. Doesn't look your way. She only speaks when the organ begins to play softly from the back. There's someone in the kitchen, listening. I think it's Claire. You glance up. Sister Claire? The infirmary nun? Stern, secretive, heavy on the valerian. You remember the belladonna in the apothecary? You remember the look she gave you when you hesitated to touch it? Why would she? She wants favour, Agnes whispers. She's already under the bishop's thumb. She feeds him names, stories. He trusts her. And she's here, right now, on the far side of the chapel, watching youths both with eyes so still they don't even blink. You look down quickly, start whispering a fake prayer. Agnes follows suit. Tonight, she mutters, we test her. You don't have time to ask how. Confession comes after compline. One by one, each sister is summoned into the sacristy, where Father Bartholomew sits behind a screen, his voice like gravel and smoke. You don't like him. He's too careful, too curious. When it's your turn, you kneel on the cold stone, heart thumping in your chest like it's trying to escape. You keep your voice steady. Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. "What sin weighs on you?" he asks. I have questioned the silence. There's a pause. He leans forward. "In what way?" You hesitate, just enough. "I overheard whispers," you say, "in the kitchen after hours." You name no names, just the kitchen. That's the bait. He asks you 3 more questions, none about you, all about others. Then he dismisses you with a penance of 3 Our Fathers and a half-day fast. Back in your cell, Agnes is waiting. He asked about the kitchen, didn't he? You nod. Took the bait. Then we watch Claire. You follow her that night, careful as breath, through corridors you know too well by now. Claire doesn't go to the infirmary. She doesn't go to the dormitory. She goes to the priory office, and she's holding a sealed letter. You and Agnes wait until she leaves. You slip in through the back, window cracked open, just enough. The fire is low, casting everything in warm orange glow. On the desk, still drying in ink, a duplicate letter. You read it. There are more of them. I will identify them one by one. The leader is Agnes, the others are novices. They meet in the scriptorium. They are not afraid of you, but they should be. Below a signature, Sister Claire. Agnes exhales like she's been holding it for years. So that's that. You ask what she's going to do. "Nothing," she says. "Not yet." She takes a scrap of charcoal and scribbles something over the letter. An endless knot. This one drawn sharp, fast and furious, and you both disappear back into the night. Here's your historical fact for the evening. In 15th century Spain, a nun named Maria de la Visitación was accused of leaking the private confessions of other sisters to ecclesiastical authorities. She was rewarded with a promotion. Some records suggest she used that position to control access to correspondence, isolate dissenters, and even help cover up abuses. One woman's betrayal bought her a lifetime of safety, but even safety doesn't come free. You return to your cell to find your belongings tossed. Your blanket is crumpled, your book of hours is missing, and sitting on your pillow is a single dried flower. A violet. You turn it over. Tucked inside, a message. "You're next." He wants your name, no signature, just the reverse knot again. You crush the flower in your hand. This is war now, and you're wide awake. It starts raining the next morning, hard, angry rain that claps against the convent roof like it's trying to break through. Everything is grey. The sky, the stone, even the faces around you. No one talks, not because of the vow of silence, because of the fear. The kind that lives just under the skin. You can see it in the way the sisters move, faster, tighter. No lingering in doorways or casual pauses to breathe in the garden air. Everyone is closing in on themselves like shutters against a storm. You eat breakfast in silence, sipping broth while the rain thunders outside. Agnes isn't at her usual spot. Neither is Sister Claire. The abbess, though, is there, seated at the head table, eating with the cold precision of someone whose world is exactly as it should be. But you know better. Agnes is gone because of last night. You both saw the letter. You both know what Claire is doing. But Agnes, she's planning something. You felt it in her silence. After the meal, you're sent to the laundry house. The worst job on the wet day. You and 2 others scrub linens with freezing water under a leaking roof while the wind rattles the shutters like ghostly fingers. You keep your head down. But one of the girls next to you, Sister Madeline, leans over, just enough to murmur, "She left. Agnes, your hands stop." "What?" "She took the south gate just after matins, before dawn." "That gate's always locked." Madeline nods. "Not for her. She had the key." Your heart lurches. Did Agnes run? After everything? Was this her plan all along? "No one saw her," Madeline whispers. "But they'll notice soon." She drops her linen and leaves before you can ask another question. You scrub the rest of the morning with numb hands and a spinning mind. Agnes wouldn't just run, not without telling you. Not after showing you the letters, not after everything she said about resistance and memory. Unless something changed, unless she had no choice. Here's your hard fact of the day. In the 14th century, a nun named Joan of Leeds faked her own death to escape convent life. She crafted a dummy of herself out of cloth and wood, staged an illness, and slipped away at night. Church officials tracked her down after she resurfaced in another town, living with a man. The bishop called it a scandalous and notorious tale. But the surviving record reads like admiration hiding behind condemnation. Because sometimes escape takes more than courage. It takes genius. Agnes was smart, smarter than most. If she left, it wasn't out of fear. It was for something bigger. You search for her that afternoon, quietly, carefully. through the cloister garden, the kitchens, even the old chapel ruins behind the stables. Nothing, no trace. But then in the scriptorium behind the stacked prayer books and spare candles, you find it. A note, folded and hidden in the spine of a psalter. If I go, it's not the end. There's a woman in the woods. She remembers everything. Follow the stone path behind the orchard. Wait until the bell for sext. Go alone. You fold the note into your habit and leave the scriptorium like nothing's changed. The orchard is off limits after last season's rot. Half the trees are dying, the other half riddled with mould. But you slip through during sext, when most are in chapel, and you take the path behind the farthest tree, the one with the gnarled trunk that looks like it's screaming. The path is narrow, overgrown, more animal trail than road. It winds through thorns and wet grass and uneven rocks. Your feet slip twice, your robe catches once and tears, but you keep going, and then you see it. A small cottage, half collapsed, pressed into the side of a wooded hill like it's hiding on purpose. Smoke curls lazily from a stone chimney. The door is open. You step inside, she's already waiting. An old woman, ancient really, sits near the hearth, stirring a pot that smells like rosemary and rain. Her eyes are sharp, too sharp for someone her age. She doesn't ask who you are. You're one of Agnes's, she says. You nod. She said you'd come. The woman gestures to a stool. You sit. Everything smells of moss and root and thyme. She pours you a cup of something bitter and earthy. You sip. She watches. I was Sister Muriel, she says at last. A long time ago, when the abbess was still a novice. Your cup pauses halfway to your lips. She doesn't know I'm alive, she says. They exiled me. Said I was mad, that I dreamed too much. You ask what she remembers. Everything, she replies. Every sister they buried in unmarked graves. Every one they starved for loving wrong. Every letter they burned. Every voice they silenced. She reaches into a woven basket beside her and pulls out a bundle of parchment tied with faded ribbon. Agnes gave me the last of them. The letters. She couldn't keep them safe anymore. She hands you the bundle. You untie it. It's not just letters. It's drawings, maps, names, dates, tiny biographies of lost women, scribbled in corners, written in code, even sewn into cloth. Agnes didn't run. She scattered the record. Muriel leans closer. There's another piece, she says, hidden in the altar stone. You frown. In the chapel? You ask. She nods. The old altar, beneath the icon of St. Lucy. Pull back the base, you'll see. You leave at dusk, heart pounding, hands full of forbidden history. Here's a fringe fact. Some nuns who were expelled for visions weren't delusional at all. They were whistleblowers. A few even documented patterns of abuse, theft and forced silence. Church officials often declared them mentally unstable or possessed. Convenient, no? You return to the convent under cover of rain. No one sees you. At least you hope not. Inside your cell you unwrap the parchment and read by candlelight. Agnes's writing is everywhere. So is Mariotta's. Even Beatrix's. And at the bottom of one letter you find your own name. She's ready, it says. She knows what they tried to erase. You lie down, candle flickering beside you. Tomorrow you'll go to the altar. Tomorrow you'll dig beneath the lies. The chapel is dark when you slip inside the next morning, darker than usual, thick with shadow, the incense from matins still hanging like a veil over everything. Candles flicker on the altar, throwing long, trembling shapes onto the stone walls. You cross yourself out of habit, then make your way slowly down the aisle, steps muffled by the worn rushes beneath your feet. Every part of you feels on edge, like the stone itself is watching, listening, judging. St. Lucy waits at the front, carved in cold relief above the altar, her marble eyes lifted toward heaven. Her stone hands holding the traditional plate with her own eyes laid neatly upon it. A gentle reminder that here, in this house, nothing comes without sacrifice. You kneel first. You make it look like prayer. But your eyes scan the edges of the altar, the seams in the marble base. Muriel said there's a piece of history hidden in there. Something worth risking everything to find. You wait until the chapel empties, a slow trickle of veiled sisters moving into the hallway, whispering their last silent prayers. Then you rise. You move to the side of the altar, fingers finding the base of the pedestal. The stone is old, cracked slightly. and after a few tense moments of searching, your fingers catch a gap just wide enough to slide into. You press. Something shifts. A panel moves. Not much, just enough for you to slip your hand inside. What you pull out is wrapped in cloth, faded red, stiff with time. You hide it under your robe before anyone notices, heart thudding so hard it feels like a bell inside your chest. You return to your cell without incident. You wait until nightfall to unwrap it. Inside, a sheaf of old parchment pages, each one covered in tight handwriting, Latin mostly, but some sections are in French. And below that, a strange ink drawing of two women, holding hands, kneeling together before a crucifix. You recognise one of the names signed at the bottom, Sister Laura of Rouen. She died 50 years ago. Or so you thought. The writings are part confession, part accusation, and part something else. She tells of a vision. Two angels descending into the convent garden, not with trumpets or fire, but with hands that reached out to one another in tenderness. She wrote that she loved another sister, and that this love was not sin, but sanctified. That they met in secret, yes, but not to shame the church, only to survive it. The next page is darker. Laura describes her punishment. How the abbess, a different abbess, long gone now, ordered her confined, chained in a cell beneath the chapel. She was told to recant or remain in darkness. She never recanted. Her last words on the page are barely legible. If no one remembers me, I was never real. You feel your hands shake. You've read documents, smuggled letters, even held a pressed flower full of meaning. But this is something else, a record they tried to erase, proof that love, pain and resistance lived here long before you ever arrived. Here's a strange historical fact. In the archives of several English convents, scholars have found entire gaps in their ledgers, years missing, names blacked out. Some believe these absences are clerical errors or damage from war. Others suspect intentional censorship, particularly during periods when the church was cracking down on deviance within religious communities. Ghost women, deleted lives. You now hold one of them in your hands. You're not sure how long you sit there reading Laura's words. The candle burns low. The wind outside picks up, pressing against the shutters like it's trying to warn you. When you finally stand, the ground feels different under your feet, like the whole convent has tilted slightly, just enough for you to see what's been hiding beneath. You know you should hide the pages, but where? You think of the crypt. You've only been there once, during a funeral for an old sister who passed quietly in her sleep. But it's quiet, unwatched, sacred, even to the abbess. You wrap the pages again, slip them into your robe, and leave while the others sleep. The crypt entrance is cold and damp, a carved tunnel below the south wing. You light a taper and walk between the stone sarcophagi, their lids carved with names and symbols long dulled by time. You stop at one marked only with a cross, no name, just the symbol. You lift the lid slightly, just enough to slip the bundle into the hollow beneath. You whisper Laura's name, then Mariotta's, then Agnes's. You whisper Anne's name last, because maybe she's not dead. Maybe she made it out. But even if she did, a piece of her was still lost here, like the others, like all of you. You return to your cell, but something's wrong. The door is open. You step inside and freeze. Your mattress is gone. The floor has been turned over. The candle snuffed out. And scrawled across the wall in what looks like ash or soot is a single word. Silence. You stand there for a long time. Quirky detail. Some convents used visual punishments for discipline. Nuns who disobeyed weren't always whipped or locked up. Sometimes they were forced to wear black hoods with embroidered sins. Others were made to eat on the floor, wear their habits inside out, or scrub the floor with their hair. It was all about humiliation, obedience, and spectacle. You know what's coming. They didn't find the papers, but they know you're close. The next morning, you're reassigned to kitchen duty, with Claire. She says nothing when you enter, just points to a pile of root vegetables and a knife. You begin peeling. Minutes pass, then she speaks. You're quiet, she says. You nod. You've been spending time alone. Another nod. You know what silence means, don't you? You grip the knife. Claire leans in, breath sharp with something bitter. You can still walk away from this. Tell them you were misled. Say Agnes tricked you. Say you wanted to confess. You meet her eyes, and you smile, because now you know too much to be afraid. You don't answer Claire. You don't nod. You don't speak. You just keep peeling the root vegetables. Thin skins curling into ribbons at your feet. Your hand moving so steadily it almost doesn't feel like your own. Claire watches you for a moment longer, then straightens and goes back to the fire, the hem of her robe grazing the stone floor like a threat that drags behind her. She thinks she's won, that you've gone quiet because you're scared, because you're breaking. But you're not, you're sharpening. She's just one knife in a much larger kitchen, and now you know where the real fire burns. By the end of the day, you've memorized everything she does, how she stores the oil, how she touches the drawer that definitely contains more than spoons, how she turns her back for exactly 3 seconds after lighting the hearth. 3 seconds. You time it. That night, after the final prayers, you don't sleep. Instead, you sit up in the dark, back straight, eyes fixed on the patch of moonlight bleeding in through your narrow window. You hold the memory of Agnes's handwriting in your mind like a candle flame. You picture Sister Laura's trembling confession. You hear Muriel's voice. Every letter they burn still leaves behind smoke. You believe her. And now, it's your turn to leave a trace. At dawn, the abbess announces a visiting bishop is coming within the week, an inspection. A routine check of records and adherence, she calls it. Her voice is clipped, too bright. She smiles too hard, you watch the room closely. Some sisters pale, others stiffen. One begins to cough uncontrollably until she's dismissed. Agnes was right. The reckoning is coming. You return to the scriptorium after morning chores, now under lock and key, but you know which window swings open if you tug just right on the rotting sill. Inside, everything is the same. Ink pots dried to dust, broken prayer books, that hollow hum of ancient breath still clinging to the walls. But someone else has been here. A corner of the floor is disturbed, scrape marks, fresh ones, leading to the back shelf. You pull it aside. Beneath it, a wooden trapdoor. You didn't know about this one. You pry it open. Below, a narrow crawl space, damp and silent, lined with old straw and mouse droppings. You don't hesitate. You lower yourself down, heart pounding in your throat, and you find her. Not Agnes. Anne. She's alive. Her hair is shorter now, chopped close to the scalp like she did it with a knife. Her robes are tattered, and her face is hollow, cheekbones sharp, eyes sunken, but she's alive. She blinks slowly when she sees you, not scared, just waiting. You crouch beside her. How long have you been down here? Her voice is hoarse, more breath than sound. Days. You ask who hid her. Agnes, she whispers. Before she left, she said to wait. Said someone would come. You help her sit up. She shakes violently from the cold. You offer her the crust of bread you brought in your pocket. She takes it with trembling hands, devours it in silence. I tried to run, she says. I almost made it to the city. Then Claire's men dragged me back. Told the abbess I had tempted others, that I'd brought sin into the cloister. She looks up at you, eyes shining with rage that still burns beneath the bruises. I didn't tempt anyone, she hisses. I loved someone. You reach for her hand. You don't say her name, but you don't have to. Beatrix. Anne squeezes your fingers. I saw what they did to her, she says. I saw them drag her into the penance chamber. I heard her screaming. She never came out. You close your eyes. It's worse than you thought. You thought the abbess might exile. Silence. Even threaten. But torture? You were naive. Open historical debate moment. Some scholars claim the extremes of punishment in convents, like confinement or flagellation, were exaggerated, symbolic more than literal. But others argue that records were softened after the fact. They cite surviving penance manuals that describe mortification of the flesh, the strap, and voluntary enclosure as spiritual tools. Voluntary. As if the woman being whipped had any say in the matter. Anne rests her head against the stone wall. She was still breathing, she murmurs, when they carried her out. You promise her you'll find Beatrix, but first you need to get Anne out of the convent. She nods, but her body is too weak to move. Give me a day, she says, then we go. You crawl back out of the hidden space and return the shelf to its place. No one sees you leave. That night you return to Muriel's cottage. She's waiting. She's alive, you tell her. She says nothing, just places another bundle in your hands. Inside, a worn leather satchel filled with dried herbs, ointments, a compass, and 2 coins wrapped in cloth. Get her to the river, she says. There's a woman in the port city who takes in runaways. She was a nun once, like us. You ask her if Agnes is safe. She's in the city, Muriel says, watching, waiting. You feel your heart catch. She left a message, Muriel adds. She said if you ever needed to disappear, the path she took is still open. You stay only long enough to memorise the directions, then you return to the convent. Quiet as fog, heart racing. The next morning, Claire calls your name in front of the entire refectory. She gestures toward the abbess. The abbess looks at you like she already knows what you've done. There's been a complaint, she says. You are to be interviewed by the bishop upon his arrival. Interviewed. You know what that means. It's the prelude to accusation, to penance, to punishment, or worse. You nod, smile faintly, and lower your head. But inside, you're facile. You're not just a nun now. You're a messenger, a carrier of stories they tried to silence. And you're not going quietly. The bishop arrives on a Thursday, just after sunrise, with a retinue of pale-faced priests and 2 stern men in heavy wool who don't introduce themselves. They don't need to. You know what they are. Enforcers. Men who wear obedience like armour and carry quiet threats in the way they step. The convent shifts as they pass, sisters bowing lower, voices quieter, backs straighter. Even the abbess looks sharper, her veil freshly starched, her expression painted into something devout. You keep your head down when he enters the chapel. Bishop Ronaldus. Old, with a voice like velvet wrapped around bone. He smiles too much, but it doesn't reach his eyes. When he speaks, it's all formal welcome and gratitude. His tone as warm as soup that's been left too long on the stove. Technically edible, but no one's excited about it. Convents, he says during the public address, are vessels of purity in a rotting world, and I trust this house is not cracked. The silence that follows is suffocating. You're summoned before him after none, not alone, of course, always with witnesses, always with the abbess sitting just behind, her rosary ticking off judgments like a metronome. They bring you to the small study off the priory hall. You're seated on a hard bench. The bishop offers you tea. You refuse. He begins with pleasantries. Where you're from, how long you've been under the abbess's care, whether you found peace here. You answer simply, politely. You tell him what he wants to hear. You smile. Then he asks, have you ever felt temptation within these walls? And that's the real start of the Inquisition. You pause, because the question is a trap. And you know it. Say yes, and you incriminate yourself. Say no, and you sound dishonest, and no one is that holy. The trick is to thread the needle. You nod slowly. Yes, Your Grace. I've struggled with doubt, with judgment, with fear of failing the sisters who look to me. He tilts his head. And have you failed them? You choose your words like you're walking a cliff. I've questioned things I shouldn't, you say, but I've not strayed. It's not a lie, it's not the whole truth either. He smiles. That's good, he says, but others claim differently. There are letters, testimonies, suggestions that you have been part of, activities unbecoming of a bride of Christ. Your hands stay still in your lap. Do you know a Sister Agnes? He asks. Yes, he waits. She was kind to me, helpful, but she's gone now. Gone, he echoes. The abbess clears her throat behind you, disappeared without a trace. You hear the lie and let it sit. The bishop leans in. Did she ever touch you? The question is acid disguised as silk. You let a beat pass, too. Then shake your head. No, you say, not in any way I found unholy. He watches you carefully, but he doesn't press, not yet. Here's your historical anchor. During the early 1300s, bishops frequently held visitations of convents, often using the visits to sniff out deviations from church law, particularly those involving sexuality or heretical beliefs. The records that survive paint a disturbing picture. Questions laced with assumptions, testimonies extracted through fear, and accusations that didn't need proof, only repetition. If 3 said it, it was true. If 1 said it with enough conviction, it was worth investigating. You are now in the mouth of that beast. The bishop thanks you and dismisses you with a quiet, God sees all. You resist the urge to reply that God also remembers better than most priests. As you walk back toward your cell, Claire steps out from behind a column. He liked you, she says. He believes you. You don't answer. She steps closer. You can still turn back. Say you were confused, misled. Say you want forgiveness. You meet her eyes. I do want forgiveness, you whisper. Just not from him. For a moment, something flickers across her face, A twitch of recognition, maybe even regret. Then it's gone. That night, you return to the crawl space. Anne is awake, her colour is better, her voice stronger, she eats the bread you brought without shaking. "I'm ready," she says, "but I don't know the way." You pull out Muriel's map, simple lines, a river bend, a gate in the city wall, a cross by the docks, you point. "We go through the orchard, to the stream, then south." She nods. "When?" she asks. "Tomorrow night." "Do you think she's still alive?" You know who she means, Beatrix. You hesitate. "I don't know," you say, "but I'm going to find out." After you settle Anne, you slip out and head for the infirmary. It's late. Claire is gone. Only one novice sleeps near the fire. You move past her, silent as mist. You open the cellar door down below, the penance room, the one Agnes showed you, the one where Beatrix screamed. The chains are still there, and so is someone else. At the far end of the room, half shadowed behind a veil of cobwebs and smoke, a figure slumps on a narrow cot. You step closer. Beatrix, alive, barely. She's thinner, bruised, one wrist still red with irritation, but her eyes snap open the second your foot touches the stone. You kneel beside her. "I'm going to get you out," you say. Her voice is cracked, dry. "Say no, I didn't repent." You touch her hand. You don't need to. You don't sleep that night. Instead, you write a letter. One single sheet. There are 3 of us. We're leaving. Not because we hate God, but because we remember him too clearly to stay where his name is used to chain women in the dark. If you come after us, we'll make sure the world knows what you've done here. You sign it with a symbol, the endless knot. Then you leave it in the abbess's prayer book, neatly folded between the pages of St. Paul's letters. Let her chew on that. The next night, just before Compline, you slip into the crypt again. Anne is waiting, so is Beatrix, barely upright but moving. The 3 of you stand in the shadows, your hands linked, and then, like ghosts, you vanish into the orchard. The rain begins again, but this time it feels like freedom. The orchard is nothing but black shapes in the rain. Twisted trees, slick mud, branches hanging like arms reaching for forgiveness, or for you. You move quickly, guiding Anne and Beatrix along the path Muriel marked. The dirt is soft beneath your feet, and every step sinks deeper than the last, like the ground itself is trying to keep you here. Anne limps but stays upright. Beatrix stumbles more than once, and you have to grab her by the elbow each time, steadying her with more force than grace. You don't talk, none of you do. Words feel too fragile for what's happening. You've slipped past the last layer of obedience, through the veil of silence, and into the raw space beyond it, where only survival and memory live. The convent's bell rings out behind you. Compline, the last call to prayer. The sisters are on their knees, heads bowed, hands folded in quiet rows, not knowing that 3 of their own are gone. You reach the stream as the rain lightens into mist. It winds quietly through the woods, deeper and faster than you remembered. The bridge is just a few old planks nailed into shape, half rotted, barely holding. You test it. It groans. Then you lead the others across one at a time. Beatrix nearly slips, her leg gives out, but Anne grabs her before you can. You don't cry, but you want to. The map says to follow the stream south for a mile, then turn east toward the bend in the river. That's where Muriel said the boat will be. The woman in the port city, another exiled nun, another lost voice, promised to wait one more night. After that, the current would take her and the chance with it. Here's your historical anchor tonight. In several medieval chronicles, there are references, short, often maddeningly vague, about disappeared women. Sisters who left without blessing or fled into shadow or were claimed by the forest. Some chroniclers speak of them like tragedies, others with a curious, hushed reverence. You wonder which one you'll become. The 3 of you move like shadows, skirts wet and heavy, breaths shallow and fast. The trees thin as you move east. In the distance, a faint golden glow, lanterns, the river, the boat, freedom. But before you can reach it, Anne stops. Her face is pale, eyes wide, and she raises a hand, not in fear, but in warning. Voices, behind you, far off but not far enough. The convent has noticed. The hunt has begun. You move faster now, the riverbank is close, you can hear the waters rush, the call of birds startled by human feet. When you reach the bend, the boat is there, rocking gently in the shallows. A cloaked figure stands at the stern holding a long pole. You don't speak, you just nod. She gestures. One at a time, Anne climbs in first, then Beatrix, her breath ragged. You step in last. The wood creaks under your weight, but the woman barely flinches. She pushes off the bank with a practiced shove, and the current takes hold, pulling you downriver, out of the trees, into the unknown. Only when you're out of sight do you breathe. The cloaked woman doesn't speak for a long while, just steers. You watch her arms work, see the flash of an old tattoo on her wrist, an anchor wrapped in vines. You wonder what her story is, what she left behind, or who. Finally she speaks. You three are lucky. A few hours later and the guards would have sealed the roads. "Where are we going?" Anne asks. The woman shrugs. "Where you're not expected." You all fall into silence again, rocked gently by the river's rhythm. But you're not done. You pull the satchel from your robe and check the contents, the letters from Muriel, the last of Agnes's notes, the names of women no one remembers, all of it still safe. When you reach the port, dawn is just beginning to unfurl its colour over the rooftops, grey and gold and bruised lavender. The city smells like sea salt and old wood, like fish and fog and survival. You're taken through a narrow alley to a door with no sign, where another woman, taller, younger, with cropped hair and a scar running across her cheek, waits with a lamp. Inside is a room with cots, blankets, clean water. There are already 2 others sleeping there. One stirs as you enter, a novice by the look of her, barely 16. She blinks at you, then rolls over. No one asks who you are. No one needs to. You help Beatrix to one of the cots, guide Anne to another. They fall asleep instantly, exhausted beyond words. You stay awake, sitting on the floor beside them, legs folded, eyes fixed on the small window as light begins to leak in. You feel weightless, untethered, and not in a good way. You've escaped, yes, but only part of you. The rest is still back there, in the stone halls, in the hidden rooms, in the chapel where Laura prayed with open eyes and hidden longing, in the cellar where Beatrix wept, in the crawl space where Anne waited for death. You think of Agnes, and when the sun finally rises, you find the writing materials stacked near the hearth. Ink, parchment, a rough reed pen. You begin to write. Not a confession, a record. You start with your name, then theirs, then the names of every sister you remember who vanished, or wept in secret, or dreamed of something beyond those walls. You describe the letters, the altar panel, the stone garden behind the orchard, the veiled woman in the woods. You write it all, because this too is survival. Here's your fringe detail. In some port towns during the late medieval period, former nuns formed underground networks, informal, undocumented shelters for runaway women. Some were excommunicated for it, others vanished. But a few left traces, coded symbols carved into dock posts, that is, with the slightly altered halos painted in chapels, prayers that doubled as signals. You think of the endless knot. You draw it at the bottom of your page, then you fold the letter and hand it to the woman with the scar. "If something happens to me," you say, "send this to the city archive." She nods without asking why. That night you sleep. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, your dreams are quiet. But the fire still burns beneath the silence. Because you're not just free, you're carrying the names of women they tried to erase. And you won't forget. You wake to the smell of bread. Real bread. Not the pale, limp wafers of convent kitchens, but thick, yeasty loaves that crackle when torn. Someone's humming in the next room. A tune you don't recognize. Joyful maybe. Defiant. Definite. Oh. You stretch under the heavy wool blanket, stiff joints complaining, and for a brief floating moment, you forget where you are. There's no stone cell, no iron chain, no stern-faced abbess with rosaries rattling like threats. Just soft light and the distant rhythmic crash of waves. Then it all comes back. Anne, Beatrix, the escape. The letters. The bishop's voice in your head like smoke curling into every memory. You sit up. Across the room, Anne is already awake, sipping water from a tin cup. Beatrix is still asleep, but she's no longer curled like a child against the wall. She's on her back now, breathing slow and deep, her brow smooth for the first time since you found her in the cellar. "You look like you slept on purpose," Anne says softly, almost smiling. You smile back, just a little. That morning, the woman with the scar, her name is Elira, you finally learn, sets a plate of warm food in front of each of you. No questions, no prayers, just food and silence. The safe kind. After breakfast, she leads you through a maze of alleyways to a dusty attic above a print shop. Inside, books, dozens of them. Stacks of hand-copied manuscripts, some bound in cracked leather, others in fraying cloth. Elira moves like she knows every title by heart, brushing dust away from spines as she walks. "There," she says, pointing to a table. "You said you write." You nod. Then write. You sit and pull the pages from your robe, the bundle of letters, confessions, fragments, the story of Agnes, of Laura, of Mariota. You lay them out in front of you like puzzle pieces. Then you begin transcribing, carefully, slowly. No flourishes, no embellishments, just the truth, as plainly as the church refused to tell it. Around midday, Elira returns. She watches you copy a page, then says, "Ever heard of Sister Urraca?" You shake your head. She smiles. She lived 300 years ago, wrote a book of visions. They said it was heresy. They burned it. But someone copied it first. That copy found its way here. She pulls a book from the shelf. Handwritten, illuminated margins, a woman kneeling before a tree that bleeds from the branches. They couldn't stop her voice, Elira says. They just made her famous. It stirs something in you. Not hope. Hope is too fragile. Too polite. This is something deeper. A low fire in the gut. Something like purpose. You copy until your fingers cramp. Anne brings you water. Beatrix watches, her eyes distant but focused. She hasn't spoken much. She doesn't need to. Just her breathing, steady now, is answer enough. Later that night you open the last letter from Agnes. It's addressed to no one. Or maybe to you, or maybe to every girl who ever kneeled before a crucifix wondering if love was supposed to hurt this much. If you're reading this, it begins, "Then you made it farther than I did." They say memory is a sin when it contradicts obedience. But I think memory is all we have left when obedience has rotted our lives from the inside out. I loved her. Mariota. That's not a confession, that's just a fact, like rain. Or ruin. You don't have to forgive the church for what it's done to us. Just make sure it doesn't forget. You trace your fingers along the ink. You remember the way Agnes looked in the candlelight. Not soft, not saintly, sharp and tired and full of fight. You wish you could have said goodbye. Here's your historical wrinkle. In 12th century Germany, there lived a nun named Hildegard von Bingen. She composed music, wrote theology, even criticised church corruption, though she did it in coded language and ecstatic visions, just enough to protect herself. The church canonised her centuries later, after she was safely dead and her sharpest writings had been interpreted into harmlessness. You wonder what Agnes might have become if she'd lived long enough to be misunderstood. The next morning, Elira tells you a scribe is coming, someone who works with the underground, someone who knows how to make copies fast, how to disguise meaning in script, how to fold revolution between the lines of a hymn. She says his name is Thomas. You're not sure if that's true. You're not sure if names mean much anymore. But when he arrives, he takes your pages, reads a few, and just says, "We'll get these out, quietly. They'll read them and not know why they're weeping." You ask where they'll go. "Everywhere," he says. "Cathedrals, cloisters, even bishops' libraries if we're lucky." You smile. Not because you believe it will fix everything, but because you know it'll cause someone, somewhere, to stop mid-prayer, blink at the page, and wonder what else has been hidden from them. That night Beatrix speaks. She says, "They wanted to break us." You nod. They didn't. And that's all. The next day, you walk through the city market. It's loud, alive, nothing like the convent. The noise feels violent at first. But then it starts to feel like music. People shouting, dogs barking, a child dragging a toy cart down the cobblestone street. You touch the pouch of letters hidden under your cloak. It's lighter now, but your memory is heavier than ever. You find a baker and buy 3 rolls. You give one to Anne, one to Beatrix, and one to the sea. You toss it off the dock, watching it bob in the waves. A gesture, not of mourning, of gratitude. You made it out. But more importantly, so did their strees. It happens by accident, or maybe not. Maybe fate has a strange sense of humour, or maybe history just keeps repeating until someone yells loud enough to interrupt it. You're in the market square 3 days after Thomas carries off the first batch of letters, wandering between carts stacked with the overripe apples and half-mended sandals, when you hear a word you never expected to hear again. A name, actually. One that hits you like a stone in the chest. Agnes. You freeze. Not because someone's calling you, but because a man in a heavy green cloak is speaking softly to a woman behind a jewellery stall, and you hear him say, "She left something in the tunnels." Your body moves before your brain does. You duck behind a barrel of dried fish and watch them. The man is older, with the round, tired look of someone who used to be a monk but decided that surviving was more interesting than obedience. The woman has a sharp chin and no veil, definitely not a nun, but she wears a silver cross tucked into the neck of her tunic, half concealed by a braided scarf. You wait until they part ways, then you follow the man. He doesn't walk like someone hiding, he walks like someone who knows. Through a narrow alley, then into a crumbling stone building with a faded sign that once read Hospitium. You give it a minute, then another, then you push the door open and slip inside. The room smells of wet earth and candle wax. He's lighting a lantern at the far end, beside what looks like a staircase carved directly into the stone floor. "I know you're there," he says without turning around. You step forward. "I heard you mention Agnes." That gets his attention. He turns slowly. His face is older than it sounded, worn and weathered, with deep creases around the eyes. "You knew her?" You nod. "I was there," you say, "at the convent." His expression shifts, something between surprise and sorrow. "She told me if anything happened, someone might come. Someone who remembered." That word again, remembered. It's always the same thread. He gestures toward the stairs. "Come on then, you should see this." The tunnel beneath the city is cold and narrow, the kind of dark that eats your footsteps and doesn't bother giving them back. Your lantern casts a small circle of light on the stone ahead, just enough to see that the walls are carved with symbols. Not crosses, not saints, not Latin. Knots, endless knots, scratched, painted, even burned into the stone, some fresh, some so old they faded into ghost markings. "She used this place to move information," the man says. "Writings, names, even people. When it came to that, you ask what's left." He stops beside a heavy wooden chest tucked behind a half-collapsed archway. Inside, papers. Not just letters, but diagrams, maps, drawings of the convent. Rooms you never knew existed. And in the middle of it all, rolled tightly and tied with twine, is a scroll marked only with a circle. You open it. It's a list. No, a network. Names, initials, locations, convents, monasteries, safe houses, even apothecaries. It's all coded, of course, but you recognise some of it. Miriel's cottage, the dock in the port city, a red X where your convent once stood. "She was building a way out," you whisper. The man nods. "She didn't just want to escape, she wanted to open the walls from the inside." You fold the scroll and tuck it inside your robe. "Why are you showing me this?" you ask. "Because she told me you'd know what to do next." You don't respond, you don't need to. Because now you do know. This isn't just about surviving anymore. It's about connecting the dots, tying the stories together, giving the scattered voices a shared language. The next day you meet with Thomas again. You bring him the scroll. He stares at it for a long time without speaking. "You'll need more scribes," he says finally. You nod. "And runners, safe routes, disguises." Thomas chuckles. "You're not thinking small." "I've done small," you say. "Small gets you chained in a cellar." He doesn't argue. You return to the attic that evening to find Anne and Beatrix waiting. Anne's reading. Beatrix is darning a cloak, her fingers moving slowly but surely. She looks up when you enter. "You found something," she says. You nod and unroll the map onto the table. The candlelight flickers across its surface like nervous breath. "We're not the only ones," you say. "There are others, dozens, maybe more." Anne leans in, her expression softening. "Then we start writing to them." "No," you say, "we start listening to them." Because here's your quirky footnote for the night. In some cities, women developed entire silent languages inside the cloister. Hand gestures, tapping codes, embroidery symbols, ways to speak under the watchful eyes of men. Some of those systems survived long enough to be recorded in old sewing manuals. Hidden speech in plain thread. You spend the next week translating the code. You send letters, slowly, cautiously. Each one signed with the endless knot, each one sealed with wax pressed by a broken rosary bead. Responses begin to trickle in. One from a convent in Lyon, we remember. Another from a widow's hospital near Bruges. We buried her near the yew tree, her name was Therese. Another still from a girl who never took the veil but knew too much to stay silent. They called her Sister Antonia. I called her mine, each one a crack in the wall. each one proof that silence was never empty. You pin the letters on the attic wall. You mark them with stars. Then one night, as you stare at the growing map, Anne says, "What happens when they find out what we're doing?" You look at her, you look at Beatrix, and you smile. "They already did once," you say. "We're still here." Because here's the truth they never wanted you to know. A convent isn't just walls and rules and bells. It's also voices, and stories, and resistance whispered in gardens at night, and tunnels beneath cities, and hands that still reach for one another even when the church says no. And you're not just reaching anymore, you're building. You don't plan for the convent to go to war, it just sort of happens, like weather, like fire catching in a dry field, slow at first, then everywhere all at once. You write one letter, then 5, then 10, and for a while it's quiet, controlled, just women trading names, memories, warnings. But then someone in Ghent copies your map and paints it in ink on the back of a sermon sheet. Then someone else sews the endless knot into the hem of a procession robe worn in full view of a bishop. Then a nun in Naples recites Agnes's words aloud in the middle of Vespers, her voice shaking like the bells of judgment themselves. And suddenly it's not quiet anymore. It's spreading. Somewhere, someone reports it. Maybe one of the informants. Maybe a frightened girl who doesn't understand what she heard. Maybe a priest who got a glimpse of something in the wrong book. Whatever the spark, it finds dry wood quickly. Within a month, you hear of arrests. 4 women in Aragon, accused of heretical gatherings. 2 more in Avignon, sent to forced enclosure. A novice in Paris, beaten in front of the entire convent for a single line of poetry found under her pillow. You feel sick, guilty, terrified, but you don't stop. Instead, you send out a new letter, copied a dozen times. If they come for you, do not deny what you know, speak it clearly, speak it together, and they cannot call it madness. The letter spreads, and that's when the retaliation begins. The first raid comes at night, on a house north of the city. A small former cloister now turned safe house. 6 women are taken. 1 is injured, none are killed, but the message is clear, they're coming. You tighten your network, you move the records again, this time to a warehouse near the docks, where Thomas says the guards don't patrol often. You bury a copy of the map in a barrel of dried beans. Another in the false bottom of a reliquary box marked St. Thecla's toe. You even burn one just to see how fast the ash scatters. You imagine it landing somewhere sacred. Meanwhile, the bishop reappears, not in your city, but in the pages of a decree sent out by papal order. A formal denouncement of unrest among cloistered women, citing dangerous networks of heretical sympathy and rumours of feminine mysticism gone unchecked. Feminine mysticism, that's what they're calling it. You could laugh if it didn't sting so much. You return to Alira's attic and find Anne staring at the new batch of letters, a crease between her eyebrows. One of the sisters in Rouen was caught, she says. She was carrying a translation of Agnes's letter. You sit beside her. Is she alive? For now. They're calling for a tribunal. The word makes your skin crawl. A tribunal doesn't mean truth, it means theatre. The church playing morality on a stage made of fear. Beatrix joins you a few minutes later. She's paler these days, walking slowly, but she carries a calm with her now, like surviving broke something inside her. And what grew back is quieter and sharper. I think, she says, it's time we fight back. You blink. We are fighting. She shakes her head. No. We're warning. We're whispering. But they're not afraid of whispers. They're afraid of proof. She sets a bundle on the table. Inside drawings of the punishment chamber, of the chains, of the cellar under the chapel. She's recreated every inch from memory, down to the grooves in the wall where dozens of knees once pressed into stone during forced prayer. Beatrix looks you dead in the eye. If they want proof, we give them this. You spend the next week building the dossier. Diagrams, letters, eyewitness accounts, names, carefully, only of those already caught or lost. No one else. You write it all in plain Latin and French, nothing coded, nothing hidden. Then you bind it. A plain leather cover. The title, Ecclesia Obscura, the Hidden Church. Thomas looks at it and breathes in sharply. This, he says, will cause a storm. You nod. Let them get wet. Here's your historical fact. During the later medieval period, collections of testimonies from women, visions, confessions, mystical writings, circulated privately among nuns. Many were destroyed, but some survived. And in the 16th century, when the Reformation cracked the church's teeth, those hidden writings were pulled from trunks and crypts and suddenly became radical proof of corruption. You're not just hiding something now, you're planting it. A seed meant for another century. You send copies of Ecclesia Obscura with trusted runners to 3 cities. One goes south, one east, one across the sea. You don't expect them all to make it. That's not the point. The point is resonance, and resonate it does. 3 weeks later, word reaches you from the east. A convent in Bohemia has thrown open its gates and declared autonomy. The sisters ring the bells at midnight, refuse to confess, and paint the endless knot on the chapel doors. When the bishop arrives, they sing so loudly he can't speak. The townsfolk gather outside and cheer. A war of song. And then from the north, a group of exiled nuns begins hosting public readings of Ecclesia Obscura in hidden rooms above inns and apothecaries. They draw crowds, women, yes, but also men. Curious monks, disillusioned priests, even the scholars, people who are tired of silence dressed as holiness. Anne reads one night. Her voice shakes, but she doesn't stop. Beatrix stands beside her. You sit in the back watching history unwrap itself like a scroll someone forgot to seal. Here's your quirky detail for the night. Some rebel nuns used embroidered samplers to record banned texts. The stitching looked harmless, just flowers and verses, but hidden in the thread were patterns that mimicked Latin script. Needlework gospel. Silk rebellion. You wonder what kind of gospel you're writing now, but you already know the answer. This isn't a gospel of saints and martyrs, it's a gospel of survivors, of voices, of women who broke their silence not with screams, but with script. And somewhere, in some cold stone room, you know the abbess is reading it too. You hope she's furious. You hope she remembers. You find out the Inquisition has arrived the same way you find out about most disasters. Too late to stop it, too early to run. It's a whisper first, a breath passed over stale bread in a quiet corner of a market. Then it's a fact. Someone reads the decree aloud in the square, trembling voice and all. There's to be a full inquiry into the unauthorized gatherings of cloistered women and the distribution of spiritually dangerous texts. The phrase they use, spiritually dangerous, sits in your mouth like spoiled milk. You can practically taste the sulphur of it. Anne hears the news while gathering ink from a vendor. Beatrix finds out from a butcher's wife whose sister lost 2 daughters to a recent raid. Thomas bursts into the attic, pale-faced and breathless. He says only 2 words. They're coming. You don't even ask who they is. You already know. You meet that night in the candle-lit attic. The map is still on the wall. More stars added every day. Convents that have received the book. Safe houses that formed. Roots that opened like veins beneath a too tight skin. But tonight, none of it matters. The lines are shifting again. What do we do? Anne asks, voice tight. Go deeper underground? Beatrix's jaw clenches. We stand. You sit in silence for a moment, watching the candle wax drip onto the pages of Agnes's letter. Your fingers trace the words you've memorized 100 times. Then you say, both. Because here's the thing about war. Some battles are fought in the open. Some are won in the shadows. And some live quietly in books that outlast empires. You split the operation in 2. Half of the network prepares to scatter, to go quiet, to preserve what can be preserved. The other half, including you, Anne, and Beatrix, prepare for what's coming. You stay. You choose to stay. Because if they want a spectacle, you'll give them one. Here's a historical fact to chew on while the noose tightens. In 1320, a woman named Marguerite Perret was burned at the stake in Paris for writing The Mirror of Simple Souls, a mystical text that challenged the Church's control over spiritual experience. She wasn't a nun, but she had the nerve to write like one, with clarity, with authority, and without permission. Her trial was swift, her execution quieter than her writing. Her book survived, her voice too. You decide if they're going to burn anything, it'll be the truth they can't contain. 3 days later, the Inquisition arrives, not just in Yorsti, but in the bones of every woman who ever tried to speak too clearly in the presence of men who'd rather she whisper. They come with scrolls and ink, with books of law and long lists of names. The man leading them's thin, hawk-eyed, and speaks like every word is a warning. He calls himself Father Corrado. Of course he does. They always have names that sound like they were chosen by Latin itself. The first thing he does is shut down the print shop. The second thing, He starts asking about you. By the end of the week, 5 women are arrested. None from your inner circle, but all connected somehow. One worked with a lira, one copied a page of Ecclesia Obscura for a convent in Lyon. One simply carried a letter that had a knot drawn in the corner. Anne wants to run, not out of fear, but strategy. We're more useful alive than famous and martyred. She's not wrong. Beatrix, though, refuses to leave. If they want to make a public example, she says, then let's give them something they'll never forget. You sit in the attic that night, staring at the burning wick of a lantern. What if they kill us? Anne finally asks. You smile, not unkindly. Then someone else reads the next line. Because that's the thing about memory. Once it's loose, you can't shove it back into the dark. The night before your arrest, you finish a final copy of the book. You add one more chapter, a record of what's happened in the last few weeks. The raids, the names of the women taken, your plan, your choice to stay. At the end you write, if this is the end, it's not the last page. Someone will pick this up. Someone always does. You give it to Thomas. No words, just the book. He nods and disappears into the night. The next morning the Inquisitors arrive with the usual theatre. Hoods, scrolls, the air of men who believe punishment is just a handshake from God. You go quietly. Anne and Beatrix follow. You don't shout, you don't resist, because there's something even louder than rebellion in silence that chooses not to beg. You're taken to a small chamber in the bishop's palace. Cold, stone, a table in the centre, 2 chairs, a candle between them. Father Corrado sits across from you. He begins with scripture. You begin with truth. You tell him everything he already suspects, but in your own words. You do not beg, you do not confess. You declare, you tell him about Agnes, about the convent, about the letters, the love, the pain. You do not justify, you record. He listens without blinking, quill in hand, as if your words are just fuel for his ink. When you're done, he sets the quill down. You admit then to spreading heresy. No, you say, I admit to remembering. That night you're returned to your cell. A simple room, straw mattress, no windows, but you always sleep anyway. Because even if they try to erase you tomorrow, they're already too late. Quirky fact, during certain inquisitions, women accused of spiritual disobedience were often offered the option of public penance instead of execution. A white robe, a procession through the city, a forced prayer. It was supposed to be humbling. But some nuns used it as a stage, reciting forbidden verses, singing hymns louder than the crowd. You think about that as you wait for dawn. You wonder what you'll wear. You wonder what you'll say. You wonder how loud your voice will sound when you make the silence burn. They wake you before sunrise. The guards are quiet, almost gentle, which somehow makes it worse. Like even they know this is more spectacle than justice, more performance than punishment. They don't shackle you. They don't speak. One simply taps your shoulder, and when you open your eyes, the torchlight behind him flickers with that same old glow you used to see in the convent corridors, long before any of this began. You rise, smooth your robe, and follow him into the pale corridors of the bishop's palace. The floor is cold beneath your bare feet, the way it always is in buildings that believe suffering purifies. You're led to a chamber just off the main hall. It's lined with old tapestries, faded saints with their eyes turned upward, mouths caught somewhere between rapture and pain. In the centre, a wooden table, 3 men seated behind it, and off to the side a scribe already dipping his pen. The ink is fresh, you can smell the iron in it. This is not a trial, it's a ritual. Father Corrado's at the centre, of course. He looks at you like he's seeing a statue that needs to be broken down to stone dust. Beside him, a younger man in priest's robes, eyes sharp, mouth tight. The third man is older, silent, face unreadable. Corrado speaks first. You have been accused of corrupting the minds of women pledged to the church, of spreading documents that defy ecclesiastical authority, and of harbouring fugitives from religious justice. You say nothing. He continues. You're offered a choice. Confess, perform public penance, and accept permanent enclosure in a sanctioned house of reformation, or continue to deny and face harsher consequences. You raise your eyes, not angry, not afraid. Define confession, you say. He falters, just for a second. The young priest picks up where Corrado pauses. You must admit your sin. Renounce your writings. Destroy all remaining copies. Disavow those you misled. You glance at the scribe. He's watching you now, not the page. Good. No, you say. Corrado exhales through his nose. Then you understand what this means. You nod. It means I speak the truth, and that scares you. There's a long silence, the kind that stretches across centuries. Then the old man, the one who hasn't spoken yet, leans forward. His voice is surprisingly soft. Why? He asks. Why risk all this? And you look at him. Look, his hands are mottled, shaking slightly. A ring glints on his finger, an old one, faded gold engraved with a symbol you don't quite recognize. Maybe once, long ago, he had faith, maybe he still does. You answer carefully, slowly, because the truth wasn't safe in silence anymore. Here's your historical gem for the night. In some recorded inquisitorial trials, especially those involving mystics, there were moments where accused women didn't break. They didn't scream, they didn't deny, they simply spoke. Calm, clear. One such case describes a nun who looked her judges in the eye and said, "I will not beg for forgiveness when my only sin was being heard." The court record notes her unrepentant nature. It doesn't say what happened to her, but the margin contains a strange faint symbol, a knot drawn in one continuous stroke. They call for guards. You're taken back to your cell, but this time you're not alone. Beatrix is there, sitting cross-legged on the floor. She smiles when she sees you. They asked? You nod. I declined. Anne joins you an hour later. She's breathless, dust on her sleeves. She crouches beside you both, heart pounding. They think you've broken, she says, but the city doesn't. You raise an eyebrow. There were people outside of the palace, she whispers, waiting. Someone painted the knot on the cathedral wall. Someone else passed out pages from Ecclesia Obscura in the market. Beatrix chuckles under her breath. It's getting messy, isn't it? You smile. That night they hold the procession. It's meant to shame you. You're led barefoot through the streets, robed in a plain shift, head uncovered, arms bound, not by chains but by red silk, meant to symbolize sin. The city watches, some boo, some cross themselves, but some don't. Some simply watch. And among them you see faces, familiar ones, runners, readers, women who once knelt in cells just like yours. One nods, another presses a hand to her chest, fingers curled into the shape of a knot. A child steps forward and places a flower on the road ahead of you. A violet. Beatrix sees it. So does Vaughan's Anne. And now, so do the guards, Bummas. They try to push the girl back, but she's already melted into the crowd. The flower stays. You walk over it. You keep walking. Back at the palace, the judgment is read. Exile. Permanent. No access to religious communities. No access to public scripture. A lifetime of silence. They hand you the decree and you tear it in half. They don't like that. But they also don't stop you. Because something has shifted. Not in the church. In the crowd. In the faces. In the silence that is no longer quiet but watching. Here's your fringe fact. In some cases, the public processions meant to shame women ended up backfiring. People cheered instead of jeered. Women kissed the hem of the accused's robe. Children ran after them, not in fear, but curiosity. And in one case, a bishop called off a penance parade halfway through because the air had turned. You feel that air now. Heavy, warm, ready. You return to the safe house under cover of night. You're bruised, hungry, exhausted, but not defeated. You sit at the table and open a blank page. You write, "They tried to make me silent." So now I write louder. And you don't stop. Not that night, not the next, not ever. Because you've remembered the truth. And you've made sure it remembers you back. You don't go back to hiding after that. You could, of course, slip into another city, let the network carry on without your face attached to it, leave your name behind like a bad memory, and become just another echo in the long corridor of whispered resistance. But something about walking through the square with violet petals stuck to your bare feet has rewired you. You realise now that shame is only powerful when you believe you're supposed to wear it. Once you shrug it off, the whole structure crumbles. So instead of hiding, you go forward. Anne arranges it, of course. She always does. Says you need to use the moment, whatever that means. Beatrix, still recovering, insists on coming sensual. Her steps slower than they used to be, but steadier. And so, 3 days after the failed penance parade, you hold a gathering. Not in secret, not at night, but in the open. It takes place in the upper room of a tanner's shop beneath a ceiling blackened with smoke and above a floor that creaks like it's deciding whether to hold. You half expect no one to come, but by midday the room is full. Not packed, but full. 23 people, women mostly, a few young men, one older priest who doesn't speak, just nods when you catch his eye. You begin with a letter, not a new one, but an old one. Laura's confession. The one carved into the walls beneath St. Lucy, hidden in an altar stone and soaked in 50 years of silence. You read it aloud, slowly, with all its vulnerability laid bare. When you finish, no one claps, no one shouts. They just sit with it, like it's a stone on the table everyone has to touch before they can speak. Then someone does. "I knew a woman like that," says a girl near the door, "at my abbey. She was sent away." Another says, "I found a book once, sewn into a blanket, a hymn rewritten as a love song." Another, "My sister went missing. They said she was called to a higher house. I think she was called to a grave," they go on. Not loud, not angry, but deliberate. And when the stories dry up for the day, you leave with a new stack of names, locations, memories, more dots to connect. More ghosts refusing to stay quiet. That night, Thomas finds you and says, "You've started something bigger than you think." You tell him you hope so. Here's your historical heartbeat. In the late 15th century, a group of Beguines in the Low Countries, lay religious women who lived communally but outside the church's rigid structure, began holding talking circles. They weren't sermons, they weren't confessions, they were just women telling the truth to one another. For some, it was the first time they'd spoken at all. Historians now believe those circles were one of the earliest forms of organised resistance within Christian communities. No swords, just voices. Over the next month the gatherings multiply, not just in your city, in others too. You start getting letters again. New hands, unfamiliar names, same endless knot drawn in the margins. Women in cloisters near Bordeaux and Venice and York, asking how to form their own circles, how to protect them, how to keep the momentum when the bishops come sniffing with their scrolls and scowls. You write back, you give them instructions, you give them stories. You remind them that history wasn't built by priests alone, and then, because nothing moves forward without a little divine chaos, pilgrims start showing up. Not in droves, not yet, but a trickle becomes a stream. Women who've heard rumours of a city where the silence cracked. Young novices who ran from their convents before their vows set like mortar. One woman arrives after walking barefoot for 7 days with nothing but a bread crust and a verse scrawled on her sleeve. The truth made flesh will be heard, you take her in, you take all of them in. The safe house grows crowded. The attic becomes a dormitory. The cellar holds not wine, but ink. You have to stop storing letters under the floorboards and start building shelves. The network shifts again, not just a chain of runners anymore. Now it's a movement. Anne starts using that word, movement, like it has legs. Beatrix, ever the realist, calls it a wildfire. Useful, she says, but it burns what it touches. You know she's right. There are consequences. One day a convent in Siena is set ablaze. No one dies, but the library is lost. You receive the news like a wound. That same week, a cloistered sister in Cologne writes that the bishop has threatened excommunication to anyone caught with heretical female writing. She includes a note. "I have memorised 2 pages. That way you can't take it from me." And here's your quirky detail for tonight. Medieval women used to embroider entire psalms onto their undergarments, not just for devotion, but for safekeeping. If the outer world stripped them bare, they'd still carry God beneath the cloth. You wonder how many of your letters now live inside hems and sleeves and pockets. You write a new essay. You title it The Gospel According to Agnes. It's not a gospel in the traditional sense. There are no miracles, no plagues, no blind men cured. Just one woman who learned how to see clearly and paid for it with everything she had. You send it out with the runners. It spreads faster than Ecclesia Obscura ever did. Because this one reads like scripture, but feels like rebellion. And somewhere in Rome, or Avignon, or wherever the men in robes decide their truths now, you know they've read it. You know they're planning their next move. Another Inquisition, another sweep. You're ready. You've stopped fearing their fire. Because you've learned something no church ever once whispered too loudly. When women remember out loud, the walls don't just crack, they fall. It's just after midnight when she arrives at the door, soaked to the bone, shivering under a veil so tattered it looks like it's been through a storm, which it probably has. You don't know her name, not yet, but the way she says, "I need to speak to her," like you're not a person but a signal, a lighthouse, something impossible and lit from the inside, that tells you everything. You let her in. She collapses into a chair by the fire and starts peeling back the layers. Wet cloak, mud-streaked robes, hands wrapped in rags. Her fingers are bleeding. Her hair's been shorn unevenly. You hand her a cup of broth and she drinks like it's the first thing she's tasted in days. "I ran from Avignon," she says, "from the Cloister of St. Marta." That's all it takes. Everyone in the room stiffens. Because St. Marta isn't just any convent. It's the fortress, the model of obedience, the crown jewel of papal control. No one runs from St. Marta. Not, and lives to speak about it. Until now. They're preparing something, she says, something bigger than tribunals. They've stopped pretending it's about heresy. Now it's about fear. They're calling it the Great Correction. The fire crackles. Someone swears under their breath. You sit back in your chair, heart steady even as your bones chill. They've gathered names, she continues. Every woman linked to Ecclesia Obscura, every house that ever hosted a meeting. They've issued arrest orders, sanctioned purges. Some bishops are competing who can flush out the most corruptive voices. They've started burning. She doesn't have to say what or who, you already know. Here's your historical route for this nightmare. In the late 1400s, certain pockets of the church grew so paranoid about dissent, especially among women in religious life, that they launched internal purges. Entire convents were shuttered, not for lack of faith, but for too much unauthorized spirit. Historians refer to it blandly as reform. Survivors called it a cleansing by silence. You ask the girl, whose name, you now learn, is Sabine, how she got out. She shrugs. "A nun helped me, older. One of the ones they tried to erase. She knew the tunnels. Always the tunnels, the secret paths, the memory of freedom hidden in bricks no one bothered to reinspect. You gather your circle that night. Anne, Beatrix, Thomas, Elira, 3 of the newer arrivals, including Sabine. The attic groans with weight and urgency. They want to make a statement, Beatrix says, so we have to beat them to it. "Burn them first?" Thomas asks, half joking. "No," you say. "Unbury what they're afraid of." So you do. The next day you take a copy of Ecclesia Obscura and hang it, publicly, from the door of the city cathedral. You nail it straight into the wood. Below it, a note. If you fear this book, it's because it remembers what you forgot, that the soul speaks with a woman's voice too. By evening it's gone, not burned, stolen. That's the beginning. Over the next week, similar copies appear on church doors in 5 cities. One is etched into the wall of a monastery. Another is carved into a slab of wood and floated down the river tied with crimson ribbon. The bishops call it blasphemy. The people start calling it the mirror gospel. You write a follow-up, not another essay. A sermon, you call it the nun and the devil. It's not what they expect. In your version, the devil is not a tempter with horns and a forked tongue. He is a man in a red cassock, holding a scroll and calling obedience holy. And the nun, she doesn't fear him. She names him. She says, "You are not temptation, you are control, and I will not kneel." The sermon spreads. It's performed in secret rooms, read aloud in alleys, whispered in dormitories. A group of sisters outside of Florence paint scenes from it onto the inside of their cloister walls, hidden behind a curtain, revealed only to those who know. Here's your quirky gem. In some convents, illuminated manuscripts were altered, barely, quietly, saints with slight smiles, angels holding blank banners. But if you held the page to the light just right, words would emerge written in invisible ink, made from lemon juice or old milk. One such page found centuries later read only, "She loved and was not ashamed." Sabine begins to speak more. She describes the layout of St. Marta, the guards, the vault where they've first started keeping confiscated writings. She remembers a name, Sister Eugenie, one of the early scribes of the network. Long thought lost. "She's still alive," Sabine says, "but they've silenced her." Beatrix speaks up. Then we break the silence again. And that's when you realise this isn't just a network anymore. It's a resistance. You organise a plan, a rescue. Elira pulls old maps of the Avignon sewer tunnels. Thomas finds a contact who can forge church seals. Anne volunteers to go in, disguised as a novice. You argue. You tell her it's too dangerous. She looks at you like you've forgotten who she is. I didn't survive that convent just to copy letters, she says. The day before she leaves, you sit with her under the window watching the pigeons fly along the rooftops. You don't have to prove anything, you tell her. I'm not, she says. I'm just doing what they told me a good nun should do. Serve. You smile. You know she's scared. So are you. But this is what it looks like now. Faith rewritten. Not on stone tablets, but in ink and nerve. You give her a small copy of Laura's letter. To keep close, you say. She presses it to her chest. That night, you write in the journal again, the one you've been keeping for months now. You add another name, another page, another line. They sent the devil to silence us. We sang louder. We remembered. We loved. We wrote. And when they came with fire, we brought rain. You put the pen down. You look around at the attic full of women once broken, now building. And you say out loud to no one, we are not afraid of the dark anymore. The sky above Avignon is bruised when Anne arrives, cloaked in novice's grey, her mouth dry with rehearsed humility. The gates of St. Marta loom before her, like the teeth of some sleeping beast. And for a second, just a second, she wonders if she's stepped into a story with only one ending. But then she remembers Beatrix's hand on her shoulder the night before, the way you looked at her, like she was already halfway to legend. And she straightens her spine, steps forward, and lies like a woman who's already died once and knows it. The guard at the gate is young. He barely looks up when she mutters something about a transfer request, shoves a crumpled letter, Thomas's forgery, into his hand. He squints at it, shrugs. You're late, he says, and smiles, just a little. I usually am. And just like that, she's in. St. Marta is worse than she imagined. No bells, no singing, just silence, heavy as wet cloth. The hallways smell of lye and old stone, and every door creaks like a warning. The sisters don't make eye contact. Some are young, some ancient. All are ghost pale, walking like their bones are too heavy to carry. It isn't a convent. It's a mausoleum with breathing statues. She's shown to a cell, bare cot, crucifix on the wall, one chipped bowl. No books, no ink, no mirrors, but she didn't come here to get comfortable. That night she watches, learns the routines, finds the cracks. There's a courtyard walk after Vespers, and the kitchen workers whisper when they think no one hears. The library, what's left of it, is locked. But she hears the key jingle on a belt worn by a sister with tremors in her right hand. She catalogues everything. The way the guards change at the third bell, the candle left unattended in the southeast hall, the gap beneath the archive door, and finally, after 4 days, she finds the vault. It's buried beneath the scriptorium, a room that once hummed with the scratch of quills and the dry scent of old ink. Now it's silent, repurposed, cold, but she finds it, tucked behind a half-broken cabinet, a trapdoor leading into the darkness. She doesn't go down, not yet, because first she has to find Sister Eugenie. She asks the kitchen girl, careful and slow, "Does anyone visit the infirmary?" The girl looks at her, blank, then whispers, "Is she still there?" 2 days later, Anne fakes a cough and is sent to the infirmary. She finds Eugenie in the back, wrapped in wool, thin as parchment, eyes closed. At first, she thinks she's too late. Then the woman speaks. "They said you might come." Anne's heart stutters. Eugenie opens one eye, smiles like it hurts. "Did she send you?" "She did." Anne doesn't have to say the name. Agnes still lives in the air between sentences. Eugenie reaches under her blanket and pulls out something, small, sharp metal. A key. "The vault," she says. "I saved what I could. You get it out. And don't look back." Anne tucks the key into her robe. The next night she slips from her cell. No sound, no prayer, just breath. She makes it to the scriptorium, forces open the trapdoor and climbs down into the vault. It's worse than she imagined. Stacks of manuscripts tied and rotting, scrolls warped from damp, ink bleeding. But some are wrapped in waxed cloth, preserved, labelled. Some have symbols, endless knots, flowers, even coded marginalia. She grabs everything she can carry. On the way up, a door creaks. Footsteps. Anne presses herself against the wall, heart hammering like a bell. A guard walks past, muttering to himself. Doesn't see her. When it's clear, she moves. Back to her cell, through the courtyard, out the side passage she charted on her first night. Thomas's contact waits outside the wall. She hands him the bundle, breathless. "Take it. Go." He vanishes into the dark. Anne stays, because she knows her job isn't done. Here's your historical edge. Some of the most important heretical documents were saved, not by scholars, but by servants. Kitchen girls, gardeners, novices. They hid texts in firewood. Under beds inside bread ovens, whole movements survived because someone decided not to burn what they were told to. Anne returns to the infirmary the next morning. Eugenie is dying. Anne sits beside her, holds her hand. "I got them out," she whispers. Eugenie nods. "Good girl." She dies that night. And Anne leaves 2 days later, under a different name in a borrowed cloak, walking with the slow, deliberate steps of a woman who's earned every bruise and carried every name. When she returns to the city, you're waiting. She doesn't speak, just hands you the satchel, you open it. Inside are names you'd thought lost, letters from Laura. A page from Mariotta, a hymn rewritten by Beatrix's hand from years before the cellar. A sermon, signed only you with the drawing. A flame inside a knot. You hug her, and neither of you speaks for a long time. Then she says, "They're preparing to burn the rest." You nod. "Then we light our own fires first." You spend the next week copying everything. Dozens of hands, dozens of rooms. The presses never sleep. And then, one dawn, you walk out into the square and pin a letter to the cathedral door. It says, "This is not a rebellion. This is a remembering. You cannot kill what was never silent. A child watches you." He asks, "Are you a nun?" You smile. "Not anymore," and he grins. "Then what are you in?" You look out at the city. I'm the echo. And somewhere, beneath stones, behind tapestries stitched into sleeves, your words begin to answer themselves. It's only after you light the candle that you notice the dagger tucked inside the altar cloth. You're in a half-forgotten chapel at the edge of the city, one of those little stone sanctuaries with flaking frescoes and pews so warped by damp that they'd have to creak like they're protesting prayer. You've come here to leave a copy of Ecclesia Obscura tucked discreetly behind the wooden statue of St. Margaret, who has the blank, serene expression of someone who's seen too much and said too little. It's supposed to be routine by now. Another drop point, another silent handoff, but this time someone's left you something, a blade. The handle is wrapped in faded cloth, stitched with red thread. It's small, elegant, and wickedly sharp. A note is pinned beside it, for when the quill isn't enough. You sit back on your heels, candlelight flickers along the edge of the metal. You think about everything that's passed through your hands. Ink, paper, blood, truth. You wonder if this dagger has already been used. You wonder if it's waiting for you to decide what kind of history you're writing now. Because somewhere out there, things are getting violent. It's been building. Letters from the eastern cities are arriving torn, stained. One came scorched at the edges, with only a single phrase left legible. They came at dusk. Another bore fingerprints in blood. You meet with Beatrix that night in the back room of a cooper's shop, now doubling as your second headquarters. She reads the note that came with the dagger. Her expression doesn't change. "I knew this would come," she says. "I thought we were building a library, not an army," you reply. She smiles. Grim. Sometimes they're the same thing. Here's your hard historical hit tonight. While monasteries were often protected by church and state alike, convents were occasionally left vulnerable. During times of unrest, plagues, wars, economic collapse, many were attacked, looted, even burned. In at least 2 documented cases in 14th century France, groups of nuns fought back, with farming tools, with stones, with knives, and in one rare case with a sword taken off the body of a fallen guard. The records refer to it as unbecoming conduct. Of course they do. You and Beatrix begin to prepare, not for war exactly, but for defence. You're not fools. This isn't about picking fights. It's about surviving long enough for your words to outlive the fists. Anne returns from another outpost with her eyes wide and haunted. There's a bishop, she says, somewhere in Arles. He's not burning books, he's collecting them. Anything with the endless knot. Anything by a woman. He's building a case. A case for what, you ask? She swallows. Mass trial. Or purge. He wants to crush it all at once, make it public. You sit there, stunned, and then you do something reckless. You write to him. It's short, sharp, you don't hide your name. If you believe silence is obedience. You've forgotten who stitched your robes and cooked your food. If you want a trial, we'll bring witnesses. But they won't say what you expect. They'll tell the truth. You leave it unsigned except for the symbol of the endless knot. You send it by runner. Thomas, of course, thinks you've lost your mind. You're poking the bear with a flaming stick. No, you say. I'm showing the bear we're not scared of its teeth. You start organising witness accounts, testimonies, statements. You collect pages from women across the country, letters from nuns, notes from novices, scribbled accounts from maids and widows and midwives and teachers. You bind them into a second volume, thicker, darker, less poetic than Ecclesia Obscura. You title it The Dagger in the Habit. And when Beatrix reads the draft, she lets out a long, quiet breath. You finally said it, she murmurs. Said what? That we didn't start this fire. We're just refusing to die in it. That night, someone tries to break into the attic. You hear the scuffle just after midnight. A crash. A yell. Elira grabs a torch and throws open the door. You find a man, just a boy really, crumpled on the floor, bleeding from the temple. Sabine stands over him with a fire iron in her hands, face pale but steady. He said he was looking for scrolls, she says. Said he was sent. Anne finds the dagger. The one left for you. It's still under the altar cloth. You realise it was never meant for you to use. It was meant for any of you. You post a guard from then on. Quiet women with louder hearts. Not fighters, not in the usual sense, but not helpless either. You teach each other how to bind wounds, how to hide papers, how to run in the dark. You learn the difference between martyrdom and strategy. Here's a fringe fact you won't find in most textbooks. In the shadow archives of a convent near Bruges, a marginal note was found next to the rule of St. Benedict. It read, "When they enter with fire, meet them with memory." It was unsigned. It wasn't meant for history. It was meant for you. The boy who tried to break in survives. You question him. He's not a spy. Not exactly, just a poor student offered coin by men in clerical robes. They said it was heresy, he mumbles. Said you were dangerous. Beatrix looks at him, eyes hard. Do we look dangerous to you? He doesn't answer. You give him a meal, a place to sleep, then you send him away with a copy of The Dagger in the Habit. Not as punishment, as proof. You realise then your words are no longer fragile. They're weapons, not swords, keys. You think of that dagger often. You keep it now, tucked in your belt, not because you expect to use it, but because it reminds you that there was once a time you thought being good meant being quiet. You were wrong. Being good means choosing what is right, even when it is sharp. And what you are building now is not a rebellion. It's a memory so loud it slices through history like steel. The sky breaks open with thunder the morning the first printed copy of The Dagger in the Habit reaches the hands of a bishop. Not metaphorical thunder, actual thunder. Full storm, sky boiling over with noise like even the weather's fed up. You're sitting beneath the eaves of the apothecary shop that's doubled as your latest hiding place, watching rain bounce off stone, holding a page of proof so sharp it practically hums. It's the testimony of a sister named Elodia. She writes about the silence before her screams, about the 2 hours she spent chained to the chapel floor while the others sang vespers like nothing was wrong, about the priest who told her that her mind was too spirited for a woman of God, about the boy they forced on her when she wouldn't repent. Her handwriting gets jagged halfway through, then small again, then it stops. You stare at that last line for a long time. They told me I'd burn if I spoke, so I learned to make my voice a match. You hand the page to Anne. She doesn't speak. No one does. Beatrix, still recovering from the fever she picked up on the last supply run, lies in the corner with a blanket over her shoulders. But she lifts her head and says, "We need to print more copies. Faster." Thomas appears in the doorway, soaked and scowling. "We've got a problem," he says. "The press near the docks was raided last night. They found fragments, covers. The bishop wants names." You ask the obvious question. "Do they have them?" Thomas shakes his head. "Not yet." That yet hangs in the air like a blade. You hold an emergency meeting in the candlelit basement. 20 women this time, scribes, runners, novices, 2 ex-nuns who used to teach Latin and now teach survival. "We have to scatter the presses," you say. "Make them mobile, piecework. No one person knows everything." One woman, a widow from Montpellier who used to copy church music, raises her hand. "I have a cart. And ink. I can build one that moves." "Do it," you tell her. "Here's your historical hit tonight. During times of intense church suppression, underground presses did exist. Most were used by banned reformers and Protestant groups, but there are a few whispered accounts, scattered, half lost, of cloistered women who made their own, not with big machines, but with wood blocks and salvage type. The trick wasn't size, it was secrecy. That night, you watch as the cart is constructed in the back alley. It doesn't look like much, just a wooden trunk on wheels, but inside it holds everything: ink, plates, pages, the weight of hundreds of women's voices waiting to be born into the world. You begin calling it the mobile gospel. 2 days later, you hear about the first burning. They don't call it that, of course. They call it a cleansing, a public ceremony organised by Bishop Amalric, the one who collected the books in Arles. He invites nobles, clerics, even allows commoners to watch. They burn 12 copies of Ecclesia Obscura in a town square, but they forget something. People can read, and before the flames can claim the words, someone, one of yours maybe, maybe not, shouts a line. She wrote with love and you lit it on fire. A small riot follows. Nothing massive. No pitchforks, but enough shoving, enough shouting, enough to draw attention. The bishop flees back to his estate. And you print 50 more copies that night. You include the New Testimonies. Elodias, yes, but also others. Women who never joined the church. Mothers, servants, witches, if you believe the charges. You write a new introduction by your own hand. This is not a defence, this is an accusation. You have stolen our bodies, our voices, our names, but we have taken them back, and now we give them to you, not so you may approve of us, but so you may remember what you did. Anne reads the draft and says, "It's not subtle." You shrug. Neither are they. Sabine, now the de facto messenger coordinator, tells you something that makes your stomach twist. They've started arresting the men too. "Anyone who's helped us," Thomas nods. "I've got 2 safe houses burned, 3 runners missing." You look at him, and you're still here. He shrugs. "If I'm going to be damned, I'd rather it be for a reason. Here's your fringe fact. Some male clerics did help banned women write and hide their works, often secretly, quietly under pseudonyms. Some were discovered and excommunicated. Some weren't discovered until centuries later, when manuscripts were unsealed and names scratched into margins were matched to diocesan records. One monk in particular left a note beside a banned poem, "I only carried the ink. She carried the fire." You remember that now as you ink your own hands. By week's end, you've distributed over 200 new pages across 6 cities. The church responds, predictably, with more decrees, more sermons, more warnings. But the people aren't as silent as they once were. Priests find notes tucked into hymnals. Nuns smuggle leaflets under their habits. A cathedral choir in Marseille slips a banned verse into their procession, and no one notices until the line, "She lived," and it was holy echoes off the vaulted ceiling. You cry when you hear about it, not from sadness, from recognition, because the tide's turned. You're no longer just reacting. You're shaping the storm. Beatrix joins you again at the press cart that night. She still limps slightly, but her grip is firm. She pulls a new sheet from the press and reads aloud the title, The 13th Gospel. You wrote it together, not a replacement, a reimagining. This gospel has no Messiah, just women who refuse to die quietly. You whisper the first line together. "In the beginning there was the silence, and she spoke." It's not scripture, but it's sacred. And when you lay that page out to dry, ink shining under moonlight, you realise you're not fighting the church anymore. You're rewriting it, one word at a time. The first time you hear your words spoken back to you by someone you've never met, it nearly knocks the wind from your chest. You're walking through the central market at dawn, cloak pulled tight, your basket empty because you haven't come for apples or bread. You've come to listen. You've learned that when things get too loud up top, decrees shouted from pulpits, threats whispered in alleyways, it's the undercurrent that matters most. The way the city hums with rumour, the way resistance hides not behind walls but inside routine. And that's when you hear it. A voice. Young, sure, not reading but reciting. If silence was holiness, they would have chained our mouths, not our hands. You freeze. The voice belongs to a girl, no older than 13, perched on the edge of a fountain with a scrap of parchment in her lap. She's reading it aloud to a small crowd of other children, each with a piece of crust in their hands, chewing slowly and listening like it's mass. You recognise the line. You wrote it. 3 months ago, late at night, while Anne was asleep beside a stack of folded letters and Beatrix was coughing in her sleep. You move closer. The girl looks up, meets your gaze and smiles. "We pass them around," she says. "They're better than sermons." You don't say anything, you just nod. You walk away, hands shaking. Later in the attic, you tell Anne. She listens with her head tilted, then says, "It's happened. We're oral tradition now." You don't laugh, but you want to. Because she's right. You've crossed some invisible line. The words aren't yours anymore. They're travelling, stitched into coats, scratched into wood beams, memorised by tendon children. Which is good, because what comes next is not survivable in the old ways. The bishops begin offering rewards: gold, pardons, protection, for information, for names, for betrayals. You hear of 3 women, formerly part of the wider circle, who accept. You can't blame them. Not really. You also don't forgive them. Because the next morning Thomas finds one of your runners dead in an alley. Throat cut. Not carved into her palm. No witnesses, no note, just a crude attempt at a message. They want you afraid again, but here's what they don't understand anymore. Fear doesn't work when your voice has already survived the fire. You gather your people. Not all, not anymore. The circle is too wide now, but your core, the ones who've lived and bled for this: Anne, Beatrix, Elira, Thomas, Sabine. And you say, "We've built the echo. Now we turn it into a bell." They don't ask what you mean. They just wait. And you explain the plan. Not to attack, not to destroy us, but to reveal. You're going to leak everything. The testimonies, the names of the bishops who covered up abuse, the safe houses burned, the orders issued in secret, the lies. You're going to print a ledger, one that names the crimes of the church, not in accusation, in documentation. Because here's a hard historical fact. In the late 15th century, documents circulated called the Register of the Unjust. It listed clerics accused of theft, violence, and coercion. It wasn't publicly acknowledged, of course, but its existence rattled the spine of church power in multiple cities. It was never found in its entirety. Some say it was buried with the woman who compiled it. Others say it became the framework for later reforms. You're about to write your own version. You call it the Black Veil Ledger, and its first entry is your own. Name, redacted. Crime, disobedience. Memory, ink. You collect testimonies from every sister, novice and worker still willing to speak. No embellishment, no poetry, just facts, dates, places, names. You list punishments: starvation, isolation, assault. You leave room for the ones who were never found. And then you begin printing. You use 5 presses, 3 mobile, 2 underground. You scatter the copies like seeds across the region. One in a confessional box, one slipped between the pages of a bishop's sermon, one handed to a travelling merchant and paid for in silence. By week's end, you've printed over 600. The church responds, of course, publicly denies it, privately panics. You know this because 2 of your contacts report that bishops are calling emergency councils, not about doctrine, not about God, about you. Sabine intercepts a scroll addressed to the inquisitorial court. It reads, "The infection is not isolated. It is rooted in the script, in the written word. If we cannot silence the women, we must destroy the language itself." You read it twice, then you laugh, because that's the moment you've been waiting for. They finally said it out loud. It was never about purity, never about sin. It was always about control, and now they've confessed it themselves. Here's your quirky corner of the night. In one medieval convent, a woman sewed secret messages into the hems of priestly vestments. They were never found until centuries later, when the fabric was repurposed into a museum display. The messages were short, sharp. "She's bled. We remembered. He struck. We spoke. They prayed. We wrote. Now it's your turn." You write the final page of the Black Veil Ledger. It says, "If you are reading this, you are already part of the remembering. You may not know our names, but you have heard our echo. And if the church teaches silence, then let this be our gospel of thunder." That night you carry 3 copies into the cathedral yourself. Anne lights the candles. Beatrix locks the doors. You place the ledgers on the altar. You kneel, not in prayer but in challenge. Because the altar was never theirs to keep, and neither was the truth. It's dusk when the bells begin ringing out of rhythm. Not the usual pattern, nothing like the clean polished peals that mark matins or vespers. This is different. a kind of panic. One high note, then a pause, then 3 fast, uneven strikes, then silence again, and then they repeat, over and over. The sound drips down the stone alleys like spilled wine, strange and wrong, and every woman in your circle knows what it means. The bishops have found the ledgers. You're sitting with Sabine in the courtyard of what used to be a convent bathhouse, now your primary distribution point. She looks up mid-sentence and goes still. You follow her gaze. And then the bells come. Again. Anne appears from the archway before you can stand. We have to move. Beatrix is already loading scrolls into crates. Thomas is grabbing the fake seals. It's not chaos, it's choreography. You've rehearsed this. Always hoped you wouldn't need it, but never trusted hope enough to leave the stage dark. You help Sabine roll up the remaining ledgers. Elira slides a bundle under the flagstones near the cistern. And then, just before you leave, you scrawl a message on the wall in charcoal. We remember even in fire, the bells haven't stopped. Here's your fact to carry into the smoke. In 1478, during the early years of the Spanish Inquisition, there was a night when dozens of suspected heretics vanished in one city before they could be seized. Not because they were warned, because they heard the bells, and an old signal, older than any tribunal. The people remembered what it meant, and they ran. Your circle runs now, but not far, because this isn't a retreat, it's a migration. You've spent months planning a new base. You called it Sancta Rupta, the Broken Sanctuary. It's an old watchtower east of the river, mostly collapsed, but dry, with thick walls and a vaulted cellar so it holds heat better than most churches hold faith. You make it there by moonrise, half mud, half fury, arms full of pages and eyes full of grit. No one speaks for a while. You sit. You listen. The air outside buzzes with tension. You know what's coming. Not just raids, not just arrests. They are going to try to erase everything, so you begin your final defense. You call it the Memory Vault. Beatrix is the one who suggests it. They can burn buildings, she says, but they can't burn what they can't find. Thomas carves out hiding spaces between stones. Anne waterproofs scrolls using boiled flax. Sabine codes the index using only symbols. A system only your circle understands. It takes a week. You barely sleep. Food is scarce. But every day, the vault grows heavier. Laura's letters, Elodia's testimony, pages from Agnes's original journal, bits of songs, diagrams of the punishment room, one confession embroidered in silk thread, a love letter signed in blood. Even the dagger, you wrap it in linen and tuck it beneath the altar stone, and not as a threat, as a warning. Here's something you didn't expect. While you hide one archive, others grow. You receive news that in Bruges, a cathedral choir performed a full reading of the 13th Gospel as part of a funeral mass for a woman who died unnamed. In Naples, a painter carves the endless knot into the frame of a bishop's portrait, tiny, barely visible, but undeniably there. In Ghent, a group of boys memorize lines from the dagger in the habit and recite them at dawn in front of their monastery. These are not nuns, not women, just witnesses. The movement has cracked open the skin of the church, and now voices are bleeding through. You get a letter from a scribe in Lyon. I used to copy psalms, now I copy truth. Another from a midwife in Marseille. I delivered a baby last week. We named her Myriel. Another from someone who doesn't sign their name. I used to pray for peace. Now I pray for memory. But the church does what it always does when cornered. It tightens. They excommunicate Anne. Not by name. Oh no, that would be too generous. They refer to her as a woman of misleading presence claiming virtue while cultivating sedition. She laughs when she hears it. Finally, she says, they noticed. Beatrix is next. Then you. Your name directly. The declaration is nailed to the doors of 6 churches. Let her voice be cut from the air. Let her hands be stilled. Let her words be drowned by holiness. You go to the city square yourself and read it loud. People gather. They listen. And when you're finished, you say, I accept this exile, because you cannot exile what no longer belongs to you. Someone applauds. Someone else says, preach. You smile. You return to Sancta Rupta and light the final candle in the vault. Anne stands beside you. It's too much to carry, she whispers. You look around, at the shelves, the scrolls, the books. At least we don't carry it alone, you say. And that's the truth of it. There's no leader now, no centre. The resistance has outgrown you. And thank God, because what you started, Agnes's whisper, Laura's grief, Mariotta's poems, Beatrix's strength, Anne's stubborn light. It's everywhere. It's not just in letters or books anymore. It's in stories told at wells, in patterns stitched into veils, in songs hummed while baking bread. It's in children naming each other after saints who never got canonized because they were too real. It's in the sighs of old women who remember the chants they weren't supposed to love. It's in the bones of every woman who ever knelt and thought, I could be more than this. So you hide what must be hidden. You share what can be shared, and you teach them how to speak in echoes. The bell tolls again that night. 1 note, then 3, then silence. But it doesn't scare you this time. Because now you ring back. You dream that night of parchment turning into wings. They flutter from your hands, pages covered in ink and sweat and grief, rising up into a sky too big to hold them. You reach for one, just one, and it dissolves between your fingers. Not gone, just free. You wake with tears in your eyes, candle still burning beside your bedroll, the scent of beeswax thick in your throat. Outside, dawn stretches slow and pale across the hills. The city still sleeps, or pretends to. Sancta Rupta hums with quiet movement. Thomas is already sharpening quills. Elira is boiling water for tea. Anne's voice murmurs a prayer you don't recognise, something softer, more hers than anything sanctioned. And Beatrix stands near the archway, staring at the horizon with that look she gets when she's already planning 5 moves ahead. You sit up, wrap the blanket tighter, and whisper to yourself, it's almost time. Because you can feel it now, can't you? The end. Not of the movement, no, that's too big to end now. That's gone wide, feral, eternal, woven into the fabric of every whispered litany and every rebel stitch. But you're part of it? The hand that first set ink to Agnes's memory. The woman who cracked open the silence like an egg against stone. She's tired, and that's okay. The vault is sealed now. Hidden beneath flagstones, disguised as a broken wine cellar. You've left no names inside, just voices, not even your own. It's better that way. Let the story speak without anchors. Let it echo. Still, there are things to finish. You spend the morning writing final letters. One to the sisters at Leon with instructions on how to rebuild their press if it's destroyed again. One to the painter in Naples, with a blessing to keep carving knots wherever he damn well pleases. And one to Sabine, who's taking over your correspondence network, even though she still blushes when you call her brilliant. You write slowly, you've earned that. And here's your history shard to carry into the coda. In the late 15th century, a handful of anonymous manuscripts written by women began circulating without attribution, without origin. Scholars scratched their heads for centuries trying to trace them. They never could. But the content, letters, prayers, testimonies, revolutionary ideas wrapped in devotion and sewn into the seams of culture. And many bore the same closing line. She remembered, and it was enough. That's how you sign your final letter. Not with a name, but with that. Then you gather your circle one last time. Anne sits beside you, the ever-faithful comet at your shoulder. Beatrix stands, arms crossed, back straight, despite her limp. Thomas, who's somehow survived all this with his sarcastic dignity intact, leans against the wall, chewing something that might have once been bread. Elira, Sabine, a few new faces who've joined quietly over the past few weeks. They all sit, cross-legged, expectant. You hold up a small, tattered book. It's Ecclesia Obscura, the first copy. The one that survived everything. The one that still smells like candle smoke and midnight sweat. This, you say, was never about starting a war. Silence. Then Anne. But we started one anyway. You nod. Yes, because they made peace impossible. You turn the pages slowly. They tried to write us out of the story, so we wrote louder, then wider, then together. You look up. You don't need me anymore. Beatrix raises a brow. You sure about that? You smile. I'm sure you'll try to summon me back if you get bored. Laughter, soft, real. You pass the book to Sabine. Keep it moving. And with that, your circle begins to break apart. In a good way. Anne is headed east to organise a new print route through the mountain towns. Beatrix wants to teach. Not theology, she says with a grin, but truth. Thomas, ever the romantic, plans to take up storytelling at taverns. I'll change all your names, he promises. Or not, depends on the mood. Sabine will stay behind, maintain the vault, keep the fire lit. You? You walk not far, just away from the weight of leadership, away from the echo chamber that started to hum even when you're not speaking. You walk to a convent that burned 10 years ago, nothing left but bones and weeds. You sit in the ruins, you open a blank book, and you begin to write something new. Not another call to arms, not even a confession, just stories. About girls who weren't allowed to laugh too loudly. About women who weren't allowed to remember. About how they did it anyway. You keep your words soft, like lullabies made of stone, because you've learned something crucial, that memory doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply refuses to vanish. Here's your last quirky detail. In one forgotten convent, long after it was abandoned, archaeologists found an old wooden spoon carved with the words, "When they buried us, we planted roots." You think about that spoon often. You hope the earth it was buried in still blooms. You press your hand to the dirt, close your eyes, and whisper the oldest prayer you know, not one the church ever taught you. Just this. Let them remember, let them speak, let them write, because you weren't the first, and you won't be the last. And that is enough. You sit beneath the stars now, the kind that don't shine brighter for the pious, the powerful, or the popes. Just stars, indifferent, eternal, quietly watching as another story folds itself into dusk. The last page is already written, but you're still here, breathing in the silence that once tried to bury you. You realise, maybe for the first time, that you are no longer a voice in rebellion. You are part of the echo now, part of the soil. You're the thread stitched into sleeves. The smudge of ink passed from one trembling hand to another. Not famous, not canonised, but kept. Somewhere far away, a girl lifts a page from the floor of a chapel and reads the words aloud without knowing who wrote them. Somewhere else, an old woman closes her eyes and hums a tune she was forbidden to learn. A child draws a knot in the dirt. A priest hesitates at the pulpit. You smile, knowing you'll never see it all. But it's happening. You started something with no end. And that is the kind of miracle no church can contain. So you rest now. Not because the fight is over, but because it's no longer yours alone. You rest because memory doesn't need you awake every hour to do its work. You rest because history is in good hands. And tomorrow? Let them write their own gospel. You've already written yours.